Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The police didn't know they were entering a house of horrors when they started looking into a murder case on February 16, 1981. There was something really strange about the house. The nightmare that started inside those walls, however, would not stay contained. Indeed, it was on the verge of seeping into reality. Although the nation would be shocked by Alan Bono's murder in Connecticut, Arne Johnson's terrifying allegation of demonic possession would garner the most media attention. Supported by Ed and Lorraine Warren, paranormal investigators, this case was unheard of. But were the demons inside, or the supernatural really to blame? Many believe David was just suffering from a mental illness. The true crime behind the film, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, is presented to you this Halloween. The first illegal killing in Brookfield's history had occurred on the evening of February 16, 1981. With dense woods on either side, Brookfield Police Department Sergeant Gordon Fairchild slowed his patrol car when he saw a man stumbling down the road. The figure looked confused, as if intoxicated, and his appearance suggested a straightforward case of public intoxication. One particular detail, however, would lead to the most contentious case of the decade. Tiny blood droplets were scattered all over the man's clothing. He didn't appear to be in a state to describe the bloodstains or his location. He admitted to the officer that he had a drinking problem and needed assistance. The man was captured by Fairchild, who escorted him back to the cruiser. The sergeant didn't know the man, but that night would be the beginning of the most bizarre case he would ever work on, one that would ultimately rock the foundations of the American legal system. A call came in as he was getting the man settled in the car. 2 miles away, a horrific murder had been attempted. According to reports, the suspect had escaped into the woods. Detective Fairchild knew then that the man they were searching for was Arne Johnson, who was seated next to him. They took him in to question him. Investigating the horrifying murder attempt further, they found that Alan Bono, 40, was lying in a pool of his own blood. A 5-inch knife had stabbed him several times in a gory manner. One of the stab wounds extended from his stomach to the base of his heart, which made the situation worse. The autopsy had completed the case, the fingerprints on the knife had been positively identified, and there were eyewitnesses to the assault. The proof was unquestionable. Investigators were certain that Alan Bono was murdered by Arne Johnson. However, it was the why, the reason for the action, that would transform this otherwise straightforward case into a riddle that defied reason and has sparked debate to this day. Alan, the victim, was still receiving medical attention at a hospital on the day Arne was captured. Arne was told that he would now face murder charges after Alan passed away from his injuries. Arne's unexpected reaction was to take a 25-minute power nap. Police Detective Sergeant John Lucas formally charged him with first-degree murder after reading him his rights when he awoke. Arne's only response during the interrogation was that he had no memory of the murder's time and that he didn't intend to harm anyone. Before the murder, he last recalled being out to lunch with his landlord Alan Bono with his wife Debbie Glatzel, her cousin Mary, and his own sister Wanda Johnson. His memory went blank after that. Debbie, Arne's wife, was called in to answer questions about what happened that day and to fill in the blanks her husband had left. The detectives had no idea that her story would lead to a barrage of the strangest explanations they had ever heard during questioning. She started by giving a description of the deceased, Alan Bono, an Australian who had offered Debbie a job and rented his house to them. For the young couple, he was more of a friend than a landlord or boss. The beginning of that afternoon was pleasant, full of laughter and family, but Alan's attitude changed as he drank too much. In addition to taunting Arne about a sinister past that had been buried but was now resurfacing, he started making offensive comments about the girls. Alan kept pushing Arne's buttons, but there was something about his past that disturbed him, something so sinister. Alan provoked Arne more and more with each taunt until he lost control and got to his feet. But there was a problem. A low, guttural sound escaped Arne's throat as his body tensed and his expression twisted. He was growling, not just angry. It became evident that a physical altercation was unavoidable, despite Wanda, Mary, and Debbie's best efforts to diffuse the mounting tension. Wanda flung herself between the two men, but Arne suddenly produced a knife, and the women watched in horror as what transpired. As though possessed, Arne repeatedly and wildly stabbed Alan until he was lying in a pool of blood. Then Arne suddenly jerked to her feet and fled. Debbie said it wasn't just different from Arne. It wasn't Arne at all. He wasn't acting alone, supposedly. During this strange interrogation, renowned paranormal investigator Lorraine Warren called the Brookfield police station because they believed that an outside force, which they dubbed the Beast, was silently pulling the strings. She was going to say something so out of the ordinary that it would make the case even stranger. It was a malicious demon within Arne, she thought, and he was innocent. Despite the fact that the detectives clearly didn't believe her, she persisted and requested that they look over their earlier records. The police were astounded by what they saw when they examined the documents from a few months prior. Lorraine had called, and she had already told the detectives that a murder like this one was bound to happen. Neither Ed Warren nor Lorraine Warren had attained their later prominence at this point. However, it was becoming evident that Debbie and Arne had a strong ally in the Warrens, who were willing to support their bizarre allegations with their contentious knowledge, if they were lying to get away with murder. If there was a demon, why would it attack Alan? How could he have caused such a violent reaction? The demon that lived in Arne allegedly took control and showed Alan where he belonged because Alan had constantly made fun of and taunted him. Lorraine implied that the demon had a purpose and was connected to something much more profound than just a random force. She claimed that the solution was found in the troubled past of Debbie's family, which included not only the Warrens, but also her brother David Glatzel, who was 11 years old. The clock was running out as the investigators got ready to delve into this sinister past, and the story was only going to get stranger by the second. The realities that awaited them were more horrifying than their worst fears. It started in Bridgeport, Connecticut, during the summer of 1980. Arne and young Debbie were searching for rental properties to move in together after becoming engaged. At that point, they discovered a house close to a well. They made the decision to move in since the house was roomy and better than others in their price range. Debbie's family provided assistance with the move. However, their idyllic reality would soon be shattered by the dream home. David, Debbie's younger brother, had been asked to sweep the master bedroom, but after a while she discovered him outside in the yard, clearly shaken. He insisted on going home without cleaning the room. Debbie gave the assignment to her older brother Alan after realizing something was amiss. However, Alan also felt uneasy shortly after beginning and promptly requested to leave. During dinner at their mother's house that evening, David and Alan both related disturbing tales about what had happened to them that day. These tales would soon be woven into something much darker. David said a man shoved him back onto the bed and threatened to hurt him and his family. Alan said he had had a similar experience. The door suddenly slammed shut in his face as he felt a ghostly presence watching him. The family believed in the supernatural and was very religious. They were therefore certain that the house was haunted. They started looking for other options after giving up the rental property. The family's encounters with the paranormal did not end there, though. David started exhibiting alarming symptoms of an unidentified cause right away. He frequently communicated the beast's messages to the family because he thought he could hear it in his ears. He thought the beast had come through the storage beneath the house and was at their door one day. Each of these incidents then added to the others, and the family was unable to turn back. David claimed to have had the impression that someone was following or watching him. He was terrified and unable to sleep as a result of his intense nightmares, which were full of images of hideous people. Family members started to see David's distress firsthand. Some reported that he would speak in deep, strange voices or show unusual strength. David's family sought assistance from famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren after realizing how serious the situation was. Famous for their work on a number of haunting cases, the Warrens thought David was under demonic possession. They documented the strange events through a series of investigations and interviews with the Glatzel family. David reportedly had violent outbursts during one particularly intense session, claiming that a malevolent entity was torturing him. The Warrens thought that this ghost had taken hold of David and was attacking him physically and mentally. The Warrens and a number of priests performed several exorcisms at the Glatzel residence in an effort to rid David of the alleged demon. David frequently screamed, convulsed, and displayed strange behaviors during the rituals, making these sessions tense and frightening. The Warrens claimed that David's suffering was so intense that he would physically attack family members and anyone else who was around when the exorcisms were taking place. During these sessions, the exorcists claimed to have seen odd things like moving objects, cold spots in the room, and a sense of an oppressive presence. David claimed to have overheard voices mocking him during this period, claiming that he was helpless and would never be able to escape its hold. The young child suffered a severe psychological injury, becoming scared and perplexed, and frequently doubting his own reality. Following months of suffering and several unsuccessful attempts, a team of priests, assisted by Ed and Lorraine Warren, performed David Glatzel's last exorcism. Among the rituals carried out, this exorcism is frequently characterized as the most severe and hazardous. David's behavior peaked in a terrifying way during the session. It was reported that his voice sounded unnaturally guttural. "You are repulsed by Jesus," the priests chanted, "Leave this child alone." Those involved claimed that David had demonstrated supernatural strength well beyond his physical capabilities and had levitated off his bed. Following what felt like hours of fervent spiritual struggle, David's condition abruptly changed. His body, which had been stiff and tense during the exorcism, began to loosen up. David was calm for the first time in months as his screams stopped. The priests and the Warrens thought that the demon had finally been expelled at this point. David didn't display the violent and unpredictable behavior he had previously displayed. Instead, he looked tired but lucid. Witnesses to his ordeal, his family described the moment as a relief, a weight being taken off their lives and their home. Nevertheless, although the exorcism was terminated, the demon continued to exist. Everything would be completely upended at this point. Here, the startling link between Arne and the eerie case of demonic possession started to emerge, exposing facts that nobody could have predicted. Ed and Lorraine Warren, as well as the Glatzel family, said that Arne had grown impatient with the demon's seeming control over David. During one of the exorcism sessions, Arne confronted the entity thought to be torturing David in a show of defiance and concern. He yelled at the demon, demanding that it abandon David and take possession of him instead. They said, "Take me on," Arne said. "If you're so strong, leave David alone and come into me." These words were meant to be a taunt, challenging the evil force to target him instead of young David. This challenge that Arne presented to the demon deeply troubled Lorraine. She thought a horrible thing might happen, so she called the Brookfield police to express her fear that something terrible was going to happen. And it did. As events transpired, investigators were certain that Arne and his followers had a story that was both frightening and humorous, but unquestionably implausible. From the investigators' point of view, the day's events were simple. After consuming excessive amounts of alcohol, Arne and Alan ended up with young girls. Alan's offensive comment about Arne's sister-in-law pushed Arne over the edge, escalating the tension. Under the influence of alcohol and his tumultuous past with the Glatzel family, Arne either lost his mind or used this as an easy excuse to confront Alan physically before leaving. The charges against him were based on this. However, what would Arne's defense entail? Did he have a crime? He would make a plea that would catch the attention of everyone on the planet, not just one of simple guilt. Ed and Lorraine Warren said during the trial, which started in October 1981, "We're going to take the devil to court." Martin Manella, Arne's defense lawyer, claimed that because Arne was under the influence of a demon at the time of the murder, he was not accountable for his actions. Such a defense was employed for the first time in American history. Manella attempted to have the Warrens testify regarding the alleged possession by Johnson and the exorcisms. Additionally, he intended to subpoena the priests who were performing the exorcisms. The defense team maintained that Arne's actions could only be explained by demonic influence. However, the defense of demonic possession was promptly dismissed by the case's presiding judge, Judge Robert Callahan. Because it was not verifiable by any legal or scientific standards, he decided that such a defense could not be used in court. Supernatural claims are not admissible under the American legal system, which is founded on observable facts and logical reasoning. After the demonic possession defense was rejected, Arne's legal team turned to self-defense. Judge Callahan said, "The courts have dealt with the existence of God. Now they're going to have to deal with the existence of the devil." The next question on the trial was whether Arne had acted in self-defense during an altercation with Alan Bono while intoxicated. According to testimony given during the trial, Alan started the deadly altercation by grabbing Mary Glatzel, the sister of Arne's girlfriend, and refusing to let her go. Although the specifics of the altercation were unclear, witnesses stated that Alan had been drinking excessively and had become agitated. Assistant State's Attorney Walter Flanagan led the prosecution's argument that Arne stabbed Alan on purpose, although the prosecution argued that the murder was the consequence of a heated argument rather than any supernatural influence. Johnson had a history of good behavior and no violent tendencies. The jury deliberated based on the evidence presented in court, despite the case's sensational nature and the initial defense's reliance on the demonic possession argument. On November 24, 1981, the jury found Arne Johnson guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Following 15 hours of deliberation, the jury agreed with the defense's arguments of mitigating circumstances, such as the fight between Arne and Alan, and rejected the notion that the murder was premeditated or that Johnson had acted with malice aforethought. Due to his good behavior, Arne was released from prison in 1986 after serving only 5 of the 10 to 20 years that he had been sentenced to. The case has had a long-lasting impact on popular culture, in addition to the legal field. Its status in paranormal lore has been solidified by Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case. Standing by their assertions that Arne Johnson had been influenced by a malevolent force and that the devil was the one who forced him to do it, they continued to write books and give interviews. The case further cemented its place in the history of the paranormal in America when it was dramatized in the popular movie The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, in 2021. As a result, the February 16, 1981 case, which was initially thought to be an open and shut case, has been a source of fascination and wonder for many years, and is still one of the most fascinating cases to be remembered on Halloween. Why did the demon, if it was responsible, attach itself to David in spite of multiple exorcisms, but lay dormant in Arne both before and after the murder? Did Arne get away with the most egregious excuse in criminal history? How did Lorraine Warren alert the Brookfield police prior to the actual murder, if it wasn't paranormal? Those who read this terrifying story are still plagued by these questions. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. After making a late-night roadside help call in January 2013, 26-year-old Texas father Brandon Lawson disappeared. When his car was discovered abandoned, what had started out as a typical night took an enigmatic turn. Brandon's voice shook in terror as he called 911 in a panic, whispering that he was being pursued and desperately needed assistance. Brandon remained a mystery despite a great deal of searching and investigation, leaving his friends and family in a desperate search for answers. What actually transpired that evening, and who was he fleeing from? Let's investigate the enigma. Brandon Lawson was an oil field worker from San Angelo, Texas at the time of his disappearance. According to reports, he was a devoted partner to his girlfriend, Ledessa Lofton, whom he had dated for 10 years, and a loving father to 4 children. Ledessa was the stepmother of Brandon's oldest daughter and the mother of their 3 children. Brandon's recent drug relapse, which resulted in his inexplicable absences, caused Ledessa great concern. Their bond was forged over years of shared experiences and the difficulties of raising a family together, despite the usual ups and downs in their relationship. But Brandon, like a lot of young people, had his share of difficulties. He had previously abused drugs, particularly methamphetamines, but according to reports, he had been clean for roughly 6 months prior to the night of his disappearance. His friends and family knew him as a strong, industrious man who was trying to change his life. However, he had previously been overcome by the hold of addiction, and he was burdened by the strain of juggling his demanding work in the oil industry with his family life. The events leading to Brandon's disappearance began on the evening of August 8, 2013, when he and Ledessa got into a fight. It started off like any other evening. After a long day of work, Brandon got home in San Angelo between 10:45 and 11 p.m. Brandon and Ledessa got into a heated argument. Although it was initially unclear what specifically started the argument, Ledessa later disclosed that she became irritated and suspicious when Brandon failed to come home the night before. After the argument grew more heated, Brandon made the decision to leave the house at 11:30 p.m. About 3 hours' drive from San Angelo, he called his father and said he was coming to his home in Crowley, Texas. He left Ledessa behind and climbed into his silver Ford F-150 at 11:54 p.m. At the time, she didn't think much of it and assumed he would calm down and come back. Ledessa later reflected on the altercation in a 2018 interview, explaining that it was caused by a number of factors. The recent birth of their youngest son, which created additional stressors between them, and Brandon's rigorous work schedule, which involved more than 60 hours per week, were major contributing factors. Ledessa acknowledged the emotional weight of her words and conveyed her sincere regret for the argument. She acknowledged that she put a lot of the blame on herself. The memory of their most recent altercation still plagued her, and she remarked, "I will never get those words back." Brandon called his brother Kyle at around 12:30 a.m. on August 9 to let him know that he had run out of gas on Highway 277 close to the tiny town of Bronte. The town of Bronte is surrounded by a broad, rocky region of desert and hills. It is surrounded by rough, harsh terrain, including dry riverbeds, rocky outcrops, and steep hills. There aren't many people living there, and it's secluded. There aren't many services in the area, and cell phone service is scarce. During the night, the sky is so dark that only the stars can be seen. The wind is the only thing breaking the heavy silence. Being stuck in a location like this can quickly turn into a major issue. Brandon Lawson experienced precisely this on the evening of August 9, 2013. Just outside of Bronte, on Highway 277, his truck ran out of gas. All of a sudden, he found himself isolated in a remote location, vulnerable to the hostile surroundings. All he could do was wait for his brother. Kyle remembered that Brandon sounded uncontrollable during one of their calls. He informed Kyle that he was being pursued, which clearly caused concern. Brandon clarified that the Mexicans in the neighborhood were pursuing him when Kyle asked for more information. Kyle, still perplexed, inquired as to whether Brandon was hallucinating as a result of drug use, but Brandon denied it. Kyle didn't know what was happening, but he was worried. In order to assist Brandon, he hurried to Ledessa's house with his wife and their 4-year-old child to get a fuel can. Kyle continued to try to contact his brother while they were driving. However, Brandon never seemed able or willing to engage in a full conversation when they spoke. Kyle tried his hardest to communicate and gain a comprehensive understanding of Brandon's predicament, but their brief and fragmented exchanges added mystery to an already perplexing situation. One of the most important and perplexing pieces of evidence in the case is the distressing 911 call that Brandon made at 12:50 a.m. Due to routing errors, the 911 call was sent to a nearby nursing home in Robert Lee, Texas. Brandon's voice was erratic and panicked during the call. Some phrases stood out among his difficult-to-understand words. The dispatcher tried to question Brandon, who was obviously perplexed by the call, but his answers were jumbled and ambiguous. He appeared to be in a panic and said that he was being chased into the woods and that he needed help right away. Even though the call was unclear, it was clear that Brandon was upset and thought someone was chasing him. The phone logs that precede Brandon's disappearance are broken down as follows. Kyle left a voicemail at 12:51 a.m. after Brandon claimed he was being pursued. After their argument, Brandon attempted to call Ledessa, but was unsuccessful because she had left her phone in her car. When Kyle's wife called Brandon as well, and Kyle called him again without getting a response, the urgency increased. Brandon called his neighbor at 12:57 a.m., but this did not provide any answers. Brandon was contacted by a nursing home dispatcher regarding his previous 911 call at 1:04 a.m. Brandon then called Kyle 3 more times at 1:09 a.m. He informed Kyle that he was bleeding while running through a field during one of these calls. In a subsequent interview, Kyle stated that he didn't believe Brandon was gravely injured. He thought his brother had just tripped or been in a small mishap. Brandon then called Kyle one last time at 1:15 a.m. This would be the final calls he made from his phone before it became silent. That night is depicted as chaotic by this series of calls. Brandon was obviously in distress and was attempting to contact his neighbor, brother, girlfriend, and even 911. However, meaningful communication was almost impossible because of bad cell reception, his panic, and perhaps the hazardous and dark terrain. The uncertainty surrounding his last moments was further compounded by the confusion between his calls and his family's efforts to find him. When a truck driver called to report that Brandon's truck was parked dangerously on the side of the road, a Coke County Sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene at around 1 a.m. Kyle had also arrived at the scene by the time the deputy did, but Brandon was nowhere to be seen. During a phone conversation with Kyle at 1:18 a.m., Brandon claimed to be able to see both Kyle and the deputy from his hiding place, saying, "I can see you. I'm right here." However, neither Kyle nor the deputy were able to see Brandon anywhere near the truck or the surrounding area, which further complicated the situation. Kyle believed Brandon was attempting to elude the police because he had an active warrant for his arrest in Johnson County on a charge of drug possession with intent to deliver. Brandon didn't want to be caught, he reasoned, especially since the deputy was already there. Kyle and the deputy didn't have all the information necessary to comprehend what was actually going on because they were unaware that Brandon had called 911 earlier. Later, Kyle stated that he didn't believe he was in danger. Kyle made the decision to drive a short distance up the road after speaking with the deputy. After the deputy left, he parked farther down in the hopes that Brandon would emerge from hiding. After waiting there for 30 to 45 minutes, Kyle decided that everything was okay and departed for San Angelo. When Brandon failed to appear, Kyle went back to the location where his truck had run out of gas at around 5 in the morning on August 9. Once more, Brandon failed to show up when he called for his brother. A deputy reported that a small private search team had been assembled to find Brandon on August 11. A few days later, they searched until about noon without discovering anything significant, having begun at about 8 a.m. The only hint they found was a tiny spot beneath a tree where it appeared someone had taken a seat. This location was visible from his truck and near the road. There were no additional indications of Brandon or his whereabouts, despite Kyle and the search team's best efforts, leaving his family with more questions than answers. Many theories have been proposed in the years following Brandon's disappearance. Some stem from the peculiarity of his last phone conversations, while others are based on the case's facts. The notion that Brandon might have been the victim of foul play is one of the most talked about theories. There has been conjecture that Brandon came into contact with someone or something dangerous on the evening of August 9, 2013, after he reported being chased into the woods in his 911 call. Some have even proposed that drug use may have played a role. People question whether Brandon was in danger, possibly a drug deal gone wrong or a run-in with violent people while stuck on the highway, given that he had used methamphetamines just before the incident. But this theory is called into question by the paucity of evidence. There were no reports of other cars in the vicinity at the time, and no evidence of a struggle was discovered close to his truck. Many people were left wondering whether foul play was involved, where it occurred, and who was involved, because the scene surrounding the truck was oddly undisturbed. The idea that Brandon may have intentionally vanished is another theory that has gained some traction. At the time, his life was complicated. Maybe he took extreme action because of his tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend, personal problems, and legal troubles. According to some, Brandon might have taken advantage of the circumstance to flee his life and start over somewhere else. There is some circumstantial evidence to support this theory. The key to Brandon's pickup truck, which had been left partially over the white line on the road, was in his possession, alone. Law enforcement started looking into the incident shortly after the truck was towed on August 9, 2013, at around 8 a.m. Assigned to the case, Deputy Neal looked for indications of activity at a number of nearby properties. The deputy wanted to find out if Brandon might have sought shelter or water on any of these properties, many of which were only used during certain seasons, but Neal couldn't find any evidence that Brandon had been there. After LaDessa formally reported missing on August 13, Texas Ranger Nick Hanna, who was now in charge of the case, searched the area in a helicopter. Brandon was nowhere to be seen when they flew over the area close to Highway 277 and the Colorado River. One intriguing finding from the helicopter search was that there was enough exposed ground for someone who was lying down or hiding to have probably been seen from above. Deputies came to the conclusion that Brandon Lawson had left Coke County as a result of this. The deputy wrote in his final report that he didn't think Brandon was hiding or lost in the area. He based his conclusion on several factors. According to Kyle Lawson, Brandon was probably hiding in the brush close to his truck so the deputy wouldn't find him. Nevertheless, the truck and its surroundings showed no indications of foul play. Above all, Brandon and Ledessa's text messages from the night of his disappearance suggested a furious dispute. Neil thought Brandon most likely walked back to the road and hitched a ride from a passing car after he and Kyle left the scene. The idea that Brandon purposefully vanished has only grown stronger as a result of his ongoing absence over the years. The region was going through a serious drought when he vanished. They were able to identify small items like corn sacks from the air during aerial searches. They could have easily seen Brandon if he had been on the ground. In addition, the river in the region was incredibly low, only reaching knee-deep in its deepest sections. These circumstances implied that Brandon would have been discovered during their searches if he had been in the region. Brandon's active warrant for possession with intent to deliver was also mentioned by the deputy as a potential explanation for his disappearance. He surmised that Brandon might have chosen to flee in order to stay out of legal hot water. The fact that Brandon cashed in his $401,000 with Renegade Oil Services shortly before going missing, potentially as part of a disappearance plan, lends more credence to this theory. Kyle Lawson was asked to meet with Sheriff McCutcheon, Ranger Hannah, and a Johnson County investigator at the same location where Brandon's warrant had been issued several months after Brandon vanished. They interrogated Kyle about his role, asking whether he had hurt or assisted his brother in getting away. In the end, Kyle asked for a polygraph to clear his name. Kyle claims that he passed the test on hurting his brother, despite some inconsistencies brought on by coughing during the exam. The accidental death or lost in the wilderness theory is another explanation for his disappearance. Arid and rocky, Highway 277 is home to cacti, thorny bushes, and dangerous creatures like wild hogs and rattlesnakes. This belief appears to be supported by the thorough searches that have been conducted, but every lead has ended in disappointment, with no sign of him. According to the final theory, Brandon's recent use of methamphetamines may have caused him to suffer from drug-induced hallucinations or paranoia. Severe paranoia, disorientation, and unpredictable conduct are all possible side effects of methamphetamine, especially if the user has been up for a long time. Brandon may have fled into the wilderness in a confused state, and his references to people chasing him may have been the product of a drug-induced hallucination. The term paranoia describes a strong mistrust or fear of other people, frequently coupled with illogical ideas or convictions that someone or something is trying to hurt them. Even when there are no actual external threats, paranoia in the context of drug use can show up as an elevated sense of threat or danger. Brandon's strange phone calls may be explained by this theory, but it doesn't address the question of what happened to him after he fled his truck. Did the weather get to him? Did he get stuck somewhere inaccessible or fall into a ravine? His family was left in a difficult position after Brandon Lawson vanished, caught between hope and the harsh realities of life. Brad Lawson, his father, struggles with mixed feelings. He is plagued by nightmares in which Brandon is still alive, possibly coerced into slave labor by a cartel, even though he is aware that the likelihood of Brandon surviving is remote. The possibility of foul play seems limitless, and Brad can't get rid of the thought that his son might still be out there somewhere. Is it possible that Brandon was being followed that evening? Did he encounter death when he entered private property? Or was it a crime of opportunity, where someone walked by, saw his weakness, and took advantage of him? Lisa Lofton can't stand the uncertainty. She worries that her kids won't ever know what happened to their father when they grow up, get married, or even start a family of their own. She is troubled by the memory of that night, particularly the altercation they had before he vanished. She battles this guilt every day after hurtful words were exchanged. The odd 911 call Brandon made that evening serves as their final connection to him. It serves as a painful reminder of his last moments for Ledessa and her kids. His two older daughters try to understand his words as they listen to the recording on YouTube, but it only makes their heartache worse. Brad is adamant that his son did not simply flee. He contends that Brandon was not forced to leave his family because the arrest warrant was insufficient. Brandon was always prepared to accept the consequences because he had previously dealt with legal issues. He actually had plans for the future, including beginning a new job the Monday after his disappearance that would pay more and come with the fact that none of Brandon's possessions, including his phone, wallet, keys, or even his shoes, have ever been located only serves to further complicate matters. How someone could vanish so totally without leaving any trace is beyond his brother's comprehension. The family's suspicion that foul play was involved is only strengthened by this. Ledessa is hopeful that someone will eventually come forward because she thinks that someone out there is aware of what happened to Brandon. She is still plagued by unresolved questions, such as the identity of the dispatcher who spoke to Brandon that evening and the trucker who reported his pickup. Ledessa thinks that these individuals may possess important hints that could ultimately clarify what transpired. Ledessa can't help but notice the ominous tone of Brandon's 911 call, even though she tells herself that his disappearance might have been an accident. She finds it hard to accept that someone would hurt the man she cherished so much. Help Find Brandon Lawson, a Facebook page created by Brandon Lawson's friends and family, has received a lot of support and attention since it was created. The page has more than 2.0000 followers as of 2024, indicating that Brandon's unsolved disappearance has generated a lot of interest and concern. This website is a vital resource for disseminating news, details, and appeals pertaining to Brandon's case. It gives Brandon's family members a place to communicate with supporters, reminisce about Brandon, and coordinate efforts to keep his story in the public eye. The page encourages anyone with information regarding Brandon's whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding his disappearance to come forward, and plays a crucial part in the ongoing search for answers. Paula Boudreau, Ledessa's hired private investigator, has also been putting in a lot of effort to find hints. The sizable community that follows the Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page frequently provides her with leads. Boudreau has encountered challenges while searching the land with cadaver dogs and helicopters. On their property, some landowners have refused to permit searches. Prior to 2022, there had been no leads or noteworthy advancements in the hunt for Brandon Lawson. But at Brandon's last known location, a small search team made a breakthrough in early 2022. They notified the authorities after finding a pile of his clothing. Human remains were discovered nearby shortly after. The Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page announced in October 2023 that the clothing discovered and initial DNA results suggested the remains were probably Brandon's. To compare the genetic markers from the remains with Brandon's father's DNA, more tests were being conducted. The Texas Ranger in charge of the case said he was cautiously optimistic that the remains would be identified. There have been no new developments regarding the identification as of October 2024. 11 years have passed since Brandon vanished, and his family is still looking for answers. Unfortunately, because of their advanced state of decomposition, these remains have not yet been definitively identified, leaving little material for identification. A portion of the remains are destroyed each time a sample is taken out and examined. For upcoming DNA testing, it is therefore imperative to preserve as much as possible. In an attempt to extract enough DNA, the remains have been sent to 2 labs, but the results have been negative thus far. The family is unable to provide additional information regarding the investigation's current status or the other options the Texas Rangers were considering in June 2023 for identifying the remains. The finding of Brandon Lawson's remains is likely to put an end to the tragic and enigmatic case of his disappearance. Even with this possible resolution, there are still a lot of unsolved questions regarding what happened that evening. Even though they are thankful for some closure, his family might never find all the answers they are looking for. The anguish of not knowing a loved one's fate and the unpredictability of life are both highlighted in Brandon's story. It highlights the necessity of continual enhancements to search and rescue operations, particularly in isolated regions such as West Texas. The memories of Brandon Lawson will live on in the hearts of his loved ones and everyone who has followed his tragic story, even though the whole truth may never be known. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The tragic death of Barbara Villarreal occurred in Garland, Texas on November 7, 1986. A large kitchen knife was found embedded in her body after she was brutally stabbed and murdered in her own home. There were bloodstains all over the crime scene, which was horrifying and gory. Despite detectives' efforts, the case remained unsolved for almost 40 years. The killer had been hiding in plain sight, leaving a trail of unsolved questions until 2023, when advances in DNA technology revealed the truth. What sinister motives drove Barbara's horrific fate, and who was the mastermind behind it? You'll be amazed at the response. Let's examine the specifics. Garland is a city with a tale of resiliency and hope located in the center of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. The city was named in honor of Attorney General Augustus H. Garland and was established in 1887 as a result of the merger of Duck Creek and Embry. Garland eventually became Dallas County's third most populated city. However, there were difficulties along the way. The city, which is in Tornado Alley, had one of its worst days in May 1927, when a terrible tornado ripped through the streets, killing 17 people and leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Even though the city was brought to its knees, its spirit was unwavering. A feeling of solidarity and resilience surfaced as the residents of Garland rebuilt their homes and lives. They banded together and helped one another through the difficult times. One family's joy and love served as an example for others. They were so cherished and admired by everyone that nobody could have predicted the heartache that would soon ensue. Everyone was delighted by Barbara's radiant smile. Her family's love was evident and strong, and her presence brightened the space. However, life had other ideas, and this family would soon experience a tragedy that would upend their entire way of life. On December 23, 1958, Barbara Faye Villarreal was born in Peru, Indiana. She was the youngest of her mother's first marriage's 4 children. Barbara suffered a terrible loss when her father died when she was a little child. The family circle grew after her mother remarried and had 2 more children. 12 Mile, a tiny community a few miles north of Peru, Indiana, was where Barbara grew up. She was surrounded by warmth and love there, which helped to mold her into the kind and sympathetic person she is today. Her early years were characterized by adventure, laughter, and a strong sense of familial values. She loved the little things, like swimming in the local lake and riding her bike to her grandparents' corner store to buy candy. Her extended family, which included many cousins with whom she enjoyed sharing recipes and making memories, was always present on Sundays and holidays. At home, Barbara loved spending time with Kami, her faithful Pomeranian friend. As she matured into a young woman, her compassion, warmth, and understanding nature became increasingly apparent. Her heart was always willing to lend a helping hand to others, and her radiant smile could light up any space. Barbara married Domingo Diaz Villarreal on February 25, 1979, and the two of them created a life full of promise, love, and laughter. Barbara had made a name for herself in the accounting division of DeGolyer and McNaughton in Dallas, Texas, by the time she turned 27. She and Domingo settled in Garland, where they were surrounded by friends and neighbors in the 3600 block of Colbath Street. One of them was Barbara's best friend, Lisa Nugent, who loved her for being a kind, considerate, sweet, and wonderful person in general. A feeling of unease descended upon the tiny New Mexico town of Lovington on the evening of November 7, 1986. In stark contrast to the horror taking place inside the Villarreal residence, the sky was a serene shade of pink and orange. Domingo Villarreal was standing at a neighbor's door at 8:52 p.m., his hands shaking, his eyes wide, and his voice trembling. Slightly lucid from shock, he begged for assistance. "There's a problem with Barbara," he managed to say. After the neighbor promptly dialed 911, emergency personnel reached the location in a matter of minutes. The house was illuminated by the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances that occupied the street. Officers entered and were greeted by a sight that chilled them to the bone. Barbara was brutally stabbed several times, and a large kitchen knife was still embedded in her body as she lay lifeless on the floor. As a brutal reminder of the evil that had killed her, the knife appeared to mock the scene. In his first statement, Domingo claimed that 2 men had broken into their house, bound him, and pulled Barbara into a different room. He stated that when Barbara's screams shattered the night air, he was in the backyard. She was being held captive by two armed men when he hurried inside. Barbara was led to a different room by one man, and Domingo was able to flee after the other man made him perform a sexual act at gunpoint. The police listened carefully, but every second that went by made them more skeptical. Domingo's face looked emotionless and his story sounded scripted. Fueled by doubts and questions, the investigation got underway. What actually took place that fateful evening? Did Domingo commit the crime or was he a victim? Although paramedics responded quickly, Barbara's injuries were obviously serious. Although it was later discovered that she had been dead for more than an hour prior to their arrival, she was declared dead at 9:50 p.m. The full scope of the horror was disclosed in the medical examiner's report. She had numerous stab wounds all over her body, each of which was a testament to the attacker's violence and rage. An investigation into a homicide was started. For the Garland Police Department, the initial investigation into Barbara Villarreal's murder was a difficult and complicated procedure. It was evident as soon as they got to the crime scene that this case would call for painstaking attention to detail and unwavering resolve. With furniture overturned and personal belongings strewn all over the floor, the house was in a state of chaos that suggested a violent struggle. Several areas had bloodstains, indicating Barbara had put up a valiant fight against her assailant. To record the scene, investigators collected blood samples, removed fingerprints from different surfaces, and took a ton of pictures. A big kitchen knife that was thought to have been used in the murder was sealed as evidence and sent for forensic analysis. Nevertheless, the technology available at the time made it difficult to draw firm conclusions from the evidence. It simply wasn't adding up. Something was missing. Police interviewed a large number of neighbors, friends, and family members in the days after the murder. Barbara was described by close friends and family as a loving, kind person who had no known enemies. Nonetheless, some claimed she had been involved in a few family conflicts, which made police wonder if there might have been a personal motivation for the crime. As investigators continued their investigation, they discovered startling information about the family. Although many saw Barbara and Domingo as a happy couple, others witnessed them fighting regularly and dealing with serious problems. Their relationship was viewed differently by those who knew them. At first, the police thought Domingo might be a murderer. He was exonerated following a rigorous interrogation, but the investigation came to a standstill because Domingo was no longer a suspect. They had no additional suspects, no evidence, and no fresh leads. The investigation stalled, and the police had no idea what to do next. A faint blood trail discovered outside the house was the only hint, but it didn't belong to Barbara or Domingo. Detectives were left wondering who could have committed such a horrible crime, because this enigmatic blood was the only indication that a killer was present. The loss devastated Domingo and Barbara's family. They struggled to find peace, as the graphic picture of her death tormented them. Fearing that anyone could be the victim of such a horrible crime, the community was also rocked. The suffering and uncertainty were exacerbated by the lack of answers. It took a pivotal discovery to reveal the truth about her untimely death, so the case remained a mystery. It was challenging for investigators to make meaningful progress because of the dearth of eyewitnesses and hard evidence. Blood samples provided no useful information, and fingerprints taken from the crime scene did not match anyone in databases that were currently in use. The police were left with a number of unsolved questions and dead ends. The case started to lose steam as the weeks stretched into months. The investigation's initial enthusiasm faded, and it encountered many difficulties. Despite their continued cooperation with the police and their intense desire for answers, Barbara's family's optimism for a speedy resolution started to fade. The case was never entirely dropped, even though there was no progress. Regular reviews were carried out by the Garland Police Department, which went over the evidence again and spoke with important witnesses again. The case was still unresolved, though, and there were no fresh leads or discoveries. 2 years later, in 1988, Domingo lost his life in a shootout in Mexico, bringing tragedy once more. Detectives learned a startling fact after his death. Domingo Villarreal had been using a stolen identity. Fingerprint analysis revealed that his true identity was Jesus Canales. Barbara's parents told police in 1994 that weeks after the murder, Jesus Canales had called them from Mexico and said he had killed one of the victims and was pursuing the other, Liborio Canales of Rodeo, Mexico. Domingo was charged with orchestrating Barbara's murder with the assistance of 2 family members, but because there was insufficient evidence, police were unable to draw any firm conclusions. Detectives also spoke with a neighbor who claimed to have discovered Domingo in her kitchen a month prior to the murder. Later, she realized her kitchen knife was gone. She verified that the missing knife was the same one when detectives showed her a picture of the murder weapon. The Villarreal case became one of many unsolved murders as the years went by. The police department, however, was adamant about solving the case and refused to give up. Public assistance was requested through media appeals. The investigation was given a much-needed boost when a cold case team was brought in to offer new insights and creative expertise. Every tip, no matter how small, was followed by the police department, which worked tirelessly. Over the years, Garland police detectives and the FBI followed up on a number of leads in Mexico and the United States, officials said. However, no noteworthy discoveries were made until 2022. A major development in 2022 was brought about by advances in DNA technology. Detectives were able to re-examine the evidence with new eyes thanks to this creative tool, which gave the investigation new life. Investigators were able to use extensive public genetic databases to find possible relatives of the suspect through investigative genetic genealogy, which blends DNA testing with conventional genealogical research. Detectives could gradually identify the criminal by comparing DNA samples taken from the crime scene with these databases. The potential reward was huge, but the process was time-consuming. Barbara's family and everyone else who had suffered the loss of a loved one to violence had hope because this potent tool had already solved a number of cold cases across the country. Police reopened the Villarreal case in 2022. The case was about to take a drastic turn, and the possibilities seemed endless with the development of DNA technology. Now, investigators could examine small samples, make connections between disparate pieces, and find buried clues. The Garland Police Department used cutting-edge DNA technology to solve the long-standing mystery in 2023, a year filled with revelation. Surprisingly, a DNA sample from the crime scene was matched to Liborio Canales after police retested every sample. Investigative genetic genealogy, which followed Canales' family tree and helped identify him as the suspect, made this discovery possible. An incredible twist came to light after more research. Domingo Villarreal had a brother named Liborio Canales. Even more startling was the fact that Jesus, Domingo had never told Barbara or the police that he had a brother. Liborio Canales was taken into custody by the Lovington Police Department on Tuesday, July 18, 2023, without any opposition. On a federal murder warrant, he was arrested and checked into the Lea County Detention Center. It was found by the police that he had left the country 2 days after killing his sister-in-law, Barbara. He had come to the United States from Mexico to celebrate his birthday with his family, not realizing that he was being pursued by police, which is why his arrest was successful. Authorities in New Mexico and the Garland Police Department worked together to make the arrest. Investigators had been following Canales around, and they quickly caught him when he crossed the border. Canales was taken into custody without incident and did not resist arrest. After that, he was taken for additional interrogation and processing. Liborio Canales eventually broke under the strain of interrogation and admitted to the horrible crime that had remained unsolved for almost 40 years. He came clean about the shocking reality of what actually transpired on that fateful day, because the weight of his secrets had become too much to bear. Canales claims that a family argument that had gotten out of hand was the driving force behind Barbara's heinous murder. Even though the specifics of the conflict are still unknown, it is clear that tension had been rising for a while before a tragic altercation. Authorities were able to assemble the evidence and create a compelling case against Canales thanks to his confession. Later, he was accused of killing Barbara. The legal proceedings proceeded swiftly because of his advanced age and the overwhelming evidence against him. Canales would ultimately be held accountable for his deeds, providing Barbara's family with closure and the community with justice. Given the seriousness of the accusations, the judge set Canales' bond at $1 million. After being deported to Texas, Canales was subjected to additional legal proceedings. An important first step toward taking responsibility for his actions was his booking into the Dallas County Jail on August 18. Canales received a 20-year prison sentence after his extradition and booking. This sentence probably means he will be incarcerated for the rest of his life because of his advanced age. After waiting for justice for almost 40 years, Barbara's family felt a sense of closure after the sentencing. The case demonstrated how crucial cold case units are, and how DNA technology can be used to solve even the most difficult cases. It also gave families of other unsolved crimes hope. According to Barbara's mother, the way the Villarreal case was resolved had a big influence on how investigations were conducted. The Barbara Villarreal case serves as an example of the effectiveness of tenacity and creativity in criminal investigations. Through the unwavering efforts of law enforcement and the revolutionary potential of DNA technology, a cold case that appeared destined to go unsolved was turned into a tale of justice. The knowledge gained from this case will continue to direct and motivate those committed to cracking cold cases and providing closure to families as we move forward. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In December 2010, at St. Malachy's Church in Tyrone, Northern Ireland, it all began exactly where it ended. In front of more than 300 guests, beauty queen and educator Michaela Harte and athlete John McArevey exchanged vows. But 3 weeks later, John came back with his young wife's body, buried in her immaculate wedding dress. What caused Michaela to pass away? Who could be so cold-blooded and cunning as to murder a woman who had just recently started to enjoy her wedded life with her beloved? And will international cooperation aid in the investigation of one of the most horrific and unforgettable crimes of the past several years? In 2005, John McArevey, the captain of the Irish football team, and Michaela Harte, the daughter of one of the nation's best football managers, met in university. The young couple fell in love at first sight and had never been apart since. Michaela gladly accepted John's proposal while on vacation in Paris. On New Year's Eve, which was also Michaela's 27th birthday, they scheduled their wedding. Following the formal wedding, the newlyweds flew out on their 3-week honeymoon. Before the most anticipated portion of their trip, 2 weeks at the 5-star Legends Hotel, situated in the fishing village of Grand Gabe on the northeast coast of Mauritius, began, they spent the first week in Dubai. Michaela thoroughly investigated local hotels before deciding on Mauritius as their idyllic honeymoon destination. They chose the Legends Hotel because it has a lot of good evaluations and is well liked by Irish travelers. They asked the hotel's receptionist if they could be assigned to one of the better rooms when they first arrived. They were told that room 1025 in the premium block was available. On January 10, 2011, after having breakfast together, John opted to play golf while Michaela sunbathed. They had lunch together once more. After lunch, Michaela usually looked forward to tea with something tasty. While she went to the room to get Kit Kat bars with her favorite dark chocolate, which she had bought from Dubai and placed in the refrigerator, she requested her husband to get tea. Although John offered to bring her the snacks, she chose to go alone because the accommodation was only 150 feet from the restaurant. While waiting for his wife to come home, John viewed videos and shot some pictures. After a while, he started to question why Michaela hadn't returned. He made the decision to find her. John knocked on the door but got no answer. He went to the receptionist after forgetting his key in the room and failing to see anything through the window. After guiding him back to the room, the corridor attendant used his key to open the door. However, the corridor attendant heard a man's cries for urgent assistance as soon as he moved a short distance away from the door. John walked into the room and found his wife in the cold water bathtub. Her lips were blue, her skin was cold to the touch, and there were noticeable bruises on her neck. John tried to assist Michaela, supposing she had planned to take a bath because of back problems, but had slid or passed out. But his attempts were unsuccessful. The dreams of a young, contented married couple came to an end when medical authorities declared Michaela dead within an hour. People kept coming and going from the newlyweds' room, and no one tried to protect the crime scene, perhaps since it was initially assumed to be an unfortunate accident. When the police entered the room and saw Michaela's condition and the chaos within, they assumed a murder had occurred, even though they had been told that a tourist had drowned. After being brought to the police station, the distressed spouse was detained for 5 hours while being questioned. Given that most murders are carried out by people who are close to the victims, this was not unusual. The harshness and inappropriateness of the police officer's remarks in John's situation were unusual. John was obviously overcome with grief by Michaela's passing. He found his wife's lifeless body in the bathtub, while only 30 minutes before he had seen her joyfully making her way to their room. But when a policeman noticed that he was crying, he may have tried to comfort him by saying, "Why are you crying? You're still young, you'll find yourself a new wife." If the hotel manager hadn't stepped in, it's unclear how long they would have held John at the station. The management reported to the police that a master key that was taken and fit all the locks had been used to open the door of room 1025. It became clear that a member of the hotel staff was responsible for the murder. Most likely, it was an accidental killing. At 2:42 p.m., a staff member, possibly a security guard with the master key, entered the room. Michaela opened her own door 2 minutes later. The maid's sudden appearance forced the thief, who might have been hiding in a tiny alcove in the toilet, to make a snap decision. Since cleaning rooms is a standard procedure in hotels, he could have just grinned at Michaela and pretended to do his job if it was part of his responsibilities. Nothing would have happened. He was aware that his presence in the room would be difficult to explain, though, if he was a security guard. He then saw no choice but to hide in the bathroom and wait for the woman to just go. However, that did not occur. Michaela chose to seize the chance and went into the restroom as investigators conjectured. She found the robber inside. The thief attacked Michaela in a panic after she fled in fear. He put Michaela in the bathtub after realizing that he had killed her, possibly in an attempt to make it seem like an accident involving the maid. Despite the shock, he may have also imagined that water would wash away any DNA evidence left on his victim. The murderer was still present when John got up from the table at 3:05 p.m. to see why his wife was taking so long. John could have apprehended the murderer at the spot if he had his keycard with him, but by the time he approached the administrator, requested that the door be unlocked, and stepped into the room, it was 3:26 p.m., and the thief, who had inadvertently become a murderer, had disappeared. The cops were under tremendous pressure to release John. It is critical to settle the case as soon as possible when a visitor is slain in a nation that depends significantly on tourism. The local police head claimed that the island had a 100% homicide clearance rate, which gave the impression that the case would be resolved quickly. Given that Michaela was one of 30 persons slain on the island in 2011, and that all cases but Michaela's were resolved by dubious confessions, one might assume he was merely praising the work of his colleagues, but any professional would be cautious. The police once again used admissions to solve every case the following year. The investigators had a perfect crime scene, which may have made up for the police's over-reliance on instinct and intuition, if that's what it is. Surveillance cameras were installed all throughout the hotel, the room was cleaned daily, the security system recorded every entry, and the hotel itself was essentially an invincible fortress with watchful security personnel everywhere. That was not at all the case, as we shall see in a moment. 2 hotel staff members were detained by the police within 2 days after the murder, and 2 of them, Avinash Tribhovan and Sandeep Munia, were charged with the crime. The other staff members obligingly became important prosecution witnesses. Dasan Narayanan, a hotel security guard, was also taken into custody a week later. On the day of the murder, Dasan was on duty. His fingerprints were discovered on a phony key that the robbers used to replace the stolen universal key in the security room, although it was impossible to determine his precise position at the time of the crime. There was nothing Dasan could do to explain how his DNA got onto the room's safe door. He gave a preemptive explanation for why his DNA might be present if it were discovered, acknowledging that he had touched Michaela's cheek in his haste to assist John. Nevertheless, the police chose to concentrate their efforts on Avinash and Sandeep and merely charged Dasan with being an accomplice to the thefts, despite his contradictory testimony. In 2012, the trial started on May 22. The police's pattern of obtaining confessions served as the foundation for the prosecution's case. According to the prosecution, Michaela discovered Avinash and Sandeep stealing cash from the safe or her purse when she returned to the hotel that day. In order to save their jobs, the robbers chose to silence Michaela because hotel workers frequently provide the majority of their family's income, not just their close relatives. Their colleague Raj Thikoi also provided testimony during the trial. After being arrested at first, he was granted immunity and turned out to be the most important prosecution witness. Raj claimed that although he was close to the room and heard a woman's anguished cries, he chose not to knock on the door. Rather, he hid and watched as Sandeep and an upset, sweaty Avinash left the newlyweds' room. When he later inquired about what had transpired, they responded, "Nothing happened, just keep quiet. If you say anything, we'll involve you in this matter." Prosecutors mostly relied on the confession that one of the suspects, Avinash Triboan, gave, in accordance with standard police procedures, in addition to witness statements. Because of their negligent investigation, it appeared as though the police were being judged alongside Sandeep and Avinash, even though they were the ones who were implicated. The defense lawyers called attention to all of the investigators' obvious flaws, errors, and gaps. First of all, the hotel was not closed when Michaela's death was found, and neither a visitor nor a staff member was questioned. The evidence was compromised since some tests were not carried out and others weren't done until the hotel room was given back to them. Although palm and fingerprints were discovered in the room, their owners were not recognized. However, there was no DNA evidence that Sandeep and Avinash were guilty. Even the paper money, which the authorities said the robbers were interested in, was not scanned for DNA or fingerprint. The court was also informed that numerous significant artifacts were not captured at all, and that all of the photos taken at the crime scene were in black and white. The enigma surrounding the 46 security cameras that recorded the activities within and outside the hotel, however, generated the most controversy. The cops refused to give the defense lawyers the videotapes in spite of repeated requests. As it turned out, they were unable to conceal the footage, not because they wanted to. Due to their inability to control the cameras, the police officers deleted 90% of the videos. Instead of providing a truthful response when asked to explain how the apparatus operates, they merely hit the button, which also happened to be the record button, and when they believed they were playing back the recordings, they were actually erasing them. International media questioned whether the local authorities were purposefully undermining the probe due to the police's obvious incompetence. Lastly, the defendants asserted that they only confessed after the police tortured them. Sandeep, who reportedly handed the key card, stated that he was forced to make the confession under threat of a firearm. Avinash also refuted his testimony, claiming that he vomited blood after being tortured and subjected to water interrogation by the police. He was also allegedly informed that his wife would be deported and that he would have to move to Ireland to live with John McAvery, who would now require a new wife. Avinash claimed that he only signed the document that was given to him, not even reading his own confession. Even though he and Sandeep were in room 1009 where a VIP customer was scheduled to stay when the murder occurred, another witness said he was coerced into providing false testimony. Sandeep demanded that his subordinate keep the space spotless at all times. He even picked up the mop personally at one point to show how the floors should be cleaned. Telecommunications data also supported Sandeep's assertion that he was speaking on the phone with his sister in Britain at the time of the incident. Lastly, it was verified by the retained security camera film that he was in a separate area of the hotel when the murder occurred. The court case took over 8 weeks to complete, even though it was only supposed to take 2 weeks. This was mostly because the defense lawyers went beyond the bounds of decency and made the trial into a spectacle. They frequently cracked jokes and caused the board, spectators, and law students in the courtroom to erupt in laughter. The defense brought up the possibility of a sexual motive for the crime, implying that Michaela's husband was involved. They implied potential wrongdoing between John and his wife and mentioned an intimate aid they discovered in the hotel room, but it was actually a straightforward insert from Cosmopolitan, a women's magazine Michaela had bought at the airport. Then, using a purportedly verified video, they tried to demonstrate that John and Michaela had a heated argument, but the people in the video weren't Michaela and John. Rather, they were two Germans who looked like them. In order to verify that he was the man in the video, John had to reach out to him on Facebook and ask him to give a statement at a German police station. All things considered, The sensationalism surrounding Michaela's murder case caused great distress to her family. Specifically, John was ranked highly on the list of readers' choices in a survey called Who Killed Michaela that was published by a local newspaper. In addition, the police released pictures of Michaela's battered and nude body to the Mauritius newspaper, which caused her family unimaginable distress. But these 8 weeks were over, and the jury members had to decide what to do. After a guilty conviction, Michaela's family thought the accused would have the right to request a review of the case because the judge gave a clear summary of the case and highlighted the suspect's culpability. They were certain that the verdict would be just what they had expected. The court also firmly asked the jurors to make the appropriate choice from their point of view, rather than to think about how this case would affect the nation's reputation. And the jury found Avinash and Sandeep not guilty, after 2 months of trial and just 2 hours of deliberation. After the acquittal verdict, John and Michaela's families were incredibly disappointed. They endured all the agony of the process, inappropriate remarks from attorneys and police, tolerated laughter in the courtroom, and even faced aggressive behavior from the locals because they were confident that the guilty parties would be punished for the murder. They were certain of Avinash and Sandeep's guilt and believed that they were acquitted because the case received global media attention and the jurors did not want the murder case to reflect negatively on Mauritius' image. The Harte and McKervey families cannot forget that Avinash's lawyer appeared on a local radio station and essentially admitted his client's guilt, mentioning how Avinash cried and apologized to Michaela's family. The interview was supposed to be presented in court, but the lawyer managed to evade his responsibilities. John believes that Avinash told the truth when he confessed to Michaela's murder. He is why, when everyone hears about death by strangling, they image the killer suffocating the victim, ripping their neck with 2 hands. But Avinash recalled that when they were in the honeymoon suite, Michaela walked in and spotted him clutching a pocketbook. She asked what he was doing. She couldn't have known that Sandeep was in the bathroom. When the girl tried to prevent Avinash from leaving the room, standing in his path, Sandeep approached her from behind and put one hand around her neck. The truth is, the autopsy report was prepared much later, and it confirmed that everything happened exactly as Avinash claimed. If Avinash wasn't certain, how could he have created such a strangulation technique? Avinash added that when Michaela fell, she struck her head on the ground. That was further supported by a bruise discovered on the back of her skull during the post-mortem. Furthermore, in summarizing the case, the judge reminded everyone that Avinash made his confession on January 12 and signed it on the 13th in the presence of his lawyer. Avinash would have been made to sign something else on the 12th if the cops had intended to fake the confession. Furthermore, 3 other doctors evaluated the youngster on separate days, and none of them discovered any evidence of abuse. After the acquittal verdict, a new investigation was launched. The key card that the murderer and thief used to enter the room was the main piece of evidence that the police concentrated on. Even these locks' mechanism, though, is unreliable. It is impossible to pinpoint the precise moment the murderer entered Michaela's room because the 240 locks in the Legends Hotel are not synced, and each one displays its unique time on the security system's dashboard. Because the precise hour of the crime is uncertain, this puts almost every suspect's alibi into doubt. The situation was exacerbated by the discovery of yet another serious weakness in the hotel's guest security. The number of possible suspects could rise from dozens to hundreds as a result of this vulnerability. Mauritian law states that the beach is public property if the hotel owns the guest rooms, dining establishments, bars, golf courses, and other such places. Locals own the island's beaches, and traders and fishermen have always had complete access to the hotel's grounds and the beach. Young boys are used to hanging around on the hotel grounds, and local craftsmen sell their wares to visitors. To put it another way, the hotel cannot guarantee the security of its property, even with cameras, gates, and security guards, and there is no way to confirm who entered the honeymoon room. Consequently, there were no noteworthy discoveries made during the fresh inquiry into the matter. Under international pressure, the Mauritian police examined Michaela's murder many times and even sought the services of a French laboratory for retesting DNA evidence. The discovery of DNA on Michaela's clothing that matched that of one of the suspects was reported as a major breakthrough in 2014, but this finding wasn't enough to justify a new trial. John offered a sizable reward for information regarding the case in 2017, in an effort to bring it back into the public eye. A lawyer called him a few weeks after he got back home to tell him that Sandeep and Avinash would now undoubtedly be arrested. Michaela's family was relieved and thought they would finally receive justice, but the attorney did not name the new evidence that made this possible. But months and weeks went by with no one being taken into custody. The case was formally ended in 2020, but the Mauritius government agreed to revisit it in 2021 after pressure from Irish MPs. A desire to re-examine the matter does not ensure that it will be resolved, which is the problem. It is difficult to investigate any crime after 10 years, not to mention the potential that Mauritius's authorities would not be motivated to track down the murderers. Many investigators have advanced in their careers over the course of 10 years, so if something is disclosed in the case that many would rather keep hidden, heads will roll. Following the trial, the relatives of John and Michaela sued the hotel for $1.6 million. The terms of the out-of-court settlement are not made public, but the funds were donated to a charity set up in Michaela's memory. Both the Legends Hotel, which was renamed the Lux Hotel, and Room 1025, which was renovated and given the new number 1026, are still quite popular. At a memorial luncheon for Michaela in 2013, John, who is now an accountant, met a sweet girl called Kara Brennan. John proposed to Kara, who works as an accountant, in 2015. James McAravey, the couple's first child, was born last year. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When 9-year-old Charlotte Senna abruptly vanished in the middle of the crowded park in Greenfield, New York, a fun and laid-back day in the park turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Charlotte appeared to disappear into thin air, but dozens of people immediately began looking for her. In a matter of seconds, the nation's attention was drawn to the Charlotte disappearance case, a terrifying story of a kidnapping, endless searches, and an amazing turn of events that left everyone in shock when the kidnapper gave a crucial clue to solving the case. Possibly more than one, this thriller is full of unexpected twists and events that unfold before our eyes. Charlotte Senna, a 9-year-old fourth grader, lives in Greenfield, Saratoga County with her two sisters ages 4 and 10 and her parents, David and Trish. Her mother is a food inspector for the Stewart Shops chain, and her father, David, is a pipeline mechanic. Charlotte's parents are a typical working family, and they never would have thought that their daughter would be the object of a repeat criminal who wants to use her to help him out financially. Evidently, though, nobody is immune to the nightmare that has become reality. Charlotte was having a picnic with her family and friends on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, at Morrow Lake State Park, which is only a 15-minute drive from their house. The 6,250-acre park is named for Morrow Lake and is located 70 kilometers north of Albany, New York. It is a well-liked recreational destination with boating and fishing opportunities, a sandy beach, 158 picnic areas, walking trails, and amazing dense forested areas. Its easy access to other resort towns draws tourists from all over the state. David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, made the decision to unwind with a sizable gathering here. Charlotte and her friends went cycling around lunchtime. She was about to head back to the camping area after a few rounds when she promised her friends that she would complete one more lap alone before joining the others. The time was around 6:15 p.m. back then. Her parents, however, became aware of her absence 10 minutes later. Other park visitors quickly joined them as they started looking for her and addressing her by name. To assist in finding the child, people got up from their tables and left their food. The area where she vanished became chaotic. They eventually located her daughter's bicycle at 6:45 p.m. That was the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare. The parents had already called the police at 6:47 p.m. They were appalled that they had already lost 30 minutes and were positive that Charlotte had been kidnapped. How were the girl's parents made aware of her abduction? They got a clue from her bicycle. Charlotte wasn't the type to just up and start walking instead of riding her bike. She could ride with the breeze, so why would she get off? If the bike had malfunctioned, things would have been different, but it was in perfect operating order. Besides, it was standing on its kickstand, not lying on the path. In other words, something, or probably someone, managed to attract the girl's attention, stop her, and then kidnap her. Police officers reached the park by 7 p.m. There were definitely severe worries about Charlotte's safety, because the bicycle was located, but she was nowhere to be found. But the police could not rule out the possibility that the child had just lost their way. As a result, both directions were pursued. Information regarding the missing child was quickly disseminated by the media. Numerous individuals looked for her, but as night fell, the situation deteriorated. Over 100 people had already begun searching the park by Sunday, and another 300 joined them the next day. They looked through a number of phones near the park. Luckily, visitors had to register and pay an entrance fee, which allowed the police to interview everyone who had come to the park for recreation. But this took time, and when the officers searched diligently and failed to locate the girl nearby, they began to suspect that she had been kidnapped. Furthermore, Charlotte's scent trail was lost nearly at the same location as her bicycle. If it was a kidnapping, the kidnapper probably had a car, took the girl inside, and drove off. As a result, the stakes were much higher. The likelihood of finding the kid alive drastically decreased just 3 hours after the kidnapping. This is due to the fact that most of the time a criminal views the victim as an object to satiate their personal desires rather than as a child. The victim becomes a witness, evidence of their crime that must be removed. Once they have accomplished their objective, of course, this discussion is about a situation in which the abductor is an unrelated individual who targets the victim, not about a parent kidnapping a child because of a custody dispute. The police put an officer at Charlotte's family's home immediately after she vanished. As David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, were still looking for their daughter in the park on October 1st, very early in the morning, even before dawn, a car pulled up close to their home. At 4:20 a.m., the policeman observed an unidentified man placing something in the family's mailbox. The man hurriedly got into the car and drove away as the officer started to approach him. Despite noting the car's model, the officer was unable to apprehend him. The police were shocked to discover a ransom note in the mailbox. For Charlotte, the man demanded $50,000. He allegedly made her write the note by force. For failing to stop the stranger, the officer was criticized. It was a chance to save the child and apprehend the kidnapper. Although he witnessed the man leaving the letter, the officer was unable to determine what the man had left in the mailbox. Many people send the parents cards, flowers, and letters of support after learning about a child's disappearance, but this note proved to be very important in saving Charlotte's life. The kidnapper must have arrived so early because he thought no one would be home and no one would notice him. However, he left a crucial hint. The case made an unexpected breakthrough at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, October 2. A fingerprint was discovered on the note by forensic specialists. They found a match after running the fingerprint through the database. Craig Ross, who was previously charged with driving under the influence in Saratoga Springs in 1999, owned it. Craig was among the people in the park when Charlotte was kidnapped, and his phone ping matched theirs. Additionally, a car registered to Craig was tracked by the police back to his mother's house in Bolton Spa, New York. Craig lived behind his mother's house in a tiny motorhome. DNA frequently plays a big part in cases like this, but in this instance, the letter contained an old fingerprint that was found to match a prior drunk driving case. Given the fingerprint, DNA would undoubtedly be present on the note, but fingerprint comparison is 1,000 times quicker. 2:30 p.m. was when the match was found. The FBI and police had already encircled Craig's home by 6:30 p.m. When a child's life was on the line, they didn't need a warrant. Craig's neighbors said they never expected to see something like that, and that the suspect's capture was more akin to a crime thriller. Approximately 6 p.m., about 200 meters from their home on Monday, Charlene and her 11-year-old daughter Bella spotted a number of police officers. Around 6 p.m., a neighbor of Craig's reported that she saw 2 cars stop on her lawn and went outside to eject the rude drivers. Then, out of the cars came police officers fully armed and wearing bulletproof vests. At least 15 police and apprehension team vehicles gathered close to Craig's residence. Armed with weapons and flash grenades, at least 30 officers in full uniform poured out of them and went into action right away. The neighbors at the time found it incomprehensible that their neighbor was detaining the missing girl against her will. But when they saw a convoy of police and FBI cars close to their homes, an ambulance and a helicopter hovering overhead, all of their doubts were dispelled. When the suspect was apprehended, the neighbors were afraid he would rush them and kidnap them and their kids. However, the officers took prompt action and prevented the situation from getting out of hand. Craig was taken into custody after 20 members of the apprehension team barged into the house. During the arrest, he resisted and was slightly hurt. The man was only wearing his underwear when they caught him. It was difficult to find the girl. She was also covered and concealed in the man's bedroom in a tiny closet. Charlotte realized right away that the officers were there to save her. When she realized that everything would be all right and that she would soon be seeing her parents and sisters, it was an extremely emotional moment. The girl was wearing a sweatshirt that was too big on her, which is interesting. One can only be thankful that Craig's motivation was financial, given that he was wearing his underwear and the girl was wearing a sweatshirt. Even though he had complete control over her, he could have done anything he wanted with the girl, and the rescue effort would not have ended as happily. The authorities notified Charlotte's parents that their daughter had been saved, was alive and unharmed at 6:32 p.m. According to Craig's neighbor, she saw Charlotte's face and exclaimed, "It's her! She's there!" as she watched Charlotte being loaded into the ambulance. The woman acknowledged that until her mother showed up and reassured her daughter that Charlotte was safe, she longed to embrace and hold her. Over the course of these few days, the girl became like family to everyone who had been worried about her. Everyone, including the police officers, prayed for her and hoped she would return home safely. As everyone saw the successful operation to free kidnapped Charlotte, they all exhaled, celebrated, gave each other pats on the back, and congratulated one another. The police officers' discovery of the potential kidnapper was a startling moment. Their two objectives when they stormed the house were to capture the kidnapper and save Charlotte's life. In this instance, things turned out better than anyone could have imagined. The criminal has been apprehended and the girl is safe and unharmed. But what if money hadn't been his motivation? It would have been too late by the time they recognized him. The mere thought of it is terrifying. Charlotte was taken to the hospital right away, and following a medical examination, her family was allowed to return home. Charlotte is in excellent health, aside from the evident shock following the kidnapping. She will still have to respond to inquiries regarding the kidnapping and her experiences during her captivity, so it's not quite over for her. To prevent Charlotte from experiencing more trauma, investigators will enlist experts who are trained in communicating with young victims. A significant development in the 3-day search for the girl was revealed to the media at a press conference on October 2. Craig, 47, faced first-degree kidnapping charges on October 3rd, the very next day. He had previously dealt with the police. First of all, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated in 1,999. His fingerprints were taken at that time and added to the police database, allowing the authorities to connect him to Charlotte's kidnapping. After he was arrested for second-degree stalking in 2016, his girlfriend sought a restraining order against him a year later, after he tried to strangle her by grabbing her by the neck. The police were looking into his involvement in violence against his 12-year-old relative just 1 month prior to Charlotte's abduction, but the case was closed. According to reports, the man, who has multiple sclerosis, moved into a trailer on his mother's property. Due to missed payments, his condition became so bad that he was unable to stay in his previous home in Porter's Corners, New York. Craig has an 11-year-old daughter and 2 grown children. He is characterized by his neighbors as a reclusive individual. They did, however, occasionally catch him working in his home's yard and interacting with his daughter, who is 11 years old and lives with him most days of the week. In reference to the man's older children, Craig's son said he doesn't want to get involved with his father, doesn't want to hear anything about him, and finds his behavior disgusting. Craig is currently detained without the possibility of bail on a first-degree kidnapping charge. He will be represented in court by a free attorney who has been given to him. Although the motive for the kidnapping is not officially stated, based on the ransom note, it is reasonable to assume that money was a major factor, even though the police are not very forthcoming with information. Craig's former girlfriend, Amanda Priest, had a lot to say. According to her, Craig hated his job and was constantly looking for people he could trust to help him. Amanda is certain that money was the driving force, but it's interesting to note that Craig appeared to have targeted Charlotte in particular, rather than just any child. The problem stems from an incident in which Patrick Senna, Charlotte's grandfather, sued Greenfield after a sledding accident in 1998. The $2 million settlement he received was well known among Saratoga's citizens. Given this knowledge, Craig may have been monitoring the family to learn more about their residence, regular locations, and other details. This is exactly why Craig kidnapped the man's granddaughter and demanded a ransom, Amanda claims, in an attempt to obtain funds to help him out financially. Amanda also mentioned that Craig had covered his trailer's windows with tarps not long ago. She is certain that everything was carefully planned as a result. He kept an eye on the family, observed them, was aware of Charlotte's routine, probably followed them from their house to the park, and waited for a chance to see the girl by herself. Investigators are looking into whether the suspect in Charlotte Senna's case is connected to any other crimes, such as the kidnapping and killing of 18-year-old Jennifer Hammond and 19-year-old Christina White. As is customary, investigators are looking into his involvement in any significant incidents in the area, even though there is currently no evidence connecting him to these cases, since their disappearances in 2003 and 2005 respectively, from Milton, the same town where Craig spent decades. The cases of Jennifer and Christina, whom investigators believe to be connected, have remained unsolved. On November 2, 2003, Jennifer went missing according to her boss. No one saw her after co-workers dropped her off at the Creek and Pines trailer park, where she was supposed to sell magazines. Later, all of the girl's possessions were discovered in an Albany hotel room where she was lodging with co-workers. After Christina's family last saw her in the evening on June 30, 2005, 2 years later her disappearance came to light. 5 kilometers from her home, witnesses reported to investigators that they saw her strolling down a road. In March 2006, hunters discovered Christina's remains, which were essentially just a skeleton, 16 kilometers from her last known location in the D-Town forest in Greenfield. According to the autopsy, Christina's chest and abdomen were fatally struck by the murderer. In October 2009, Jennifer's remains were discovered a few kilometers away. Although the cause of her death is unknown, investigators concluded that considering the location of their kidnapping and the location of their bodies, the girls were most likely murdered by the same individual. According to criminal profiler John Kelly, who was familiar with the area and probably liked red-hamed girls, Craig Ross presumably abducted Charlotte, but we know that the best predictor of present or future behavior is past behavior. Therefore, it's always important to find out if a person has committed abductions in the past. There may be a connection because Craig's path from the park to his house apparently goes through wooded areas connected to these 2 unsolved murders. He was keeping an eye on the family and may have believed he could kidnap them again because he had done it successfully in the past. However, he could demand ransom and simultaneously improve his financial situation rather than committing murder. In any event, the inquiry is still ongoing to determine whether he is connected to any other crimes. He has been questioned by the police in the interim to determine whether he was keeping an eye on Charlotte and whether his motivations extended beyond his need for money. The Senna family thanked everyone who put in so much effort to bring their daughter home. Naturally, they expressed their relief at Charlotte's return home and recognize how lucky they are that things turned out this way. They are aware that not all kidnapped children make it back home safely. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Susan Walters, formerly known as Susan Kuhnhausen, was employed at Portland Hospital in Oregon's Critical Care and Resuscitation Unit on September 1, 2006. Before going home after her 6th-floor shift, she made the decision to visit a beauty parlor to get a new hairstyle and unwind after a demanding day. She felt revitalized and renewed when she left the salon. Maybe she thought of the proverb that says, "A woman is about to change her life when she changes her hairstyle." Susan had no idea how accurate this statement would prove to be. She came upon a 1-story blue Cape Cod-style home with a gray fence around it. She went through the back door and discovered a note from her husband, Mike, in the hallway by the microwave. He said he had gone to the beach and had to leave. They would meet up on Friday or Saturday, he added. Susan heard the security system and unlocked the kitchen door. After deactivating it by entering the code, she proceeded to the front door and emerged into the front yard. Susan gave herself a minute or two to check the mail outside on this warm, clear September evening. When she finally removed her shoes and went back inside, she saw that the bedroom was unusually dark. She always drew back the curtains in the morning, so this was out of the ordinary. But she brushed it off, assuming she had been rushing and had forgotten, and moved on into the room. Out of nowhere, a man emerged from behind the bedroom door. He was a huge giant that suddenly materialized, standing 180 centimeters tall and weighing about 90 kilograms. He had on a baseball cap pulled down over his eyes and a striped shirt. His long gray hair was pulled back into a ponytail that was concealed beneath the cap, and the rest of his face was entirely covered by a gray beard and mustache that made him appear even more menacing. Susan was most horrified to see that he was wearing yellow rubber gloves and that he had a hammer in one of them. Most people would instinctively run away if they saw a stranger in their bedroom wielding a hammer, but Susan could not be considered a normal individual. She was 51 years old and had spent 30 years working as a nurse in the critical care and intensive care units, so she understood how difficult it was. She had subdued patients who had taken illegal substances, dealt with wounded men who were writhing in agony, and learned how to deal with any of those situations while maintaining composure. She routinely received self-defense training, just like other hospital nurses. They knew how to escape a grip or sidestep a blow. Susan had gained self-confidence through years of training, so she didn't flee when the stranger tried to hit her with the hammer. Rather, she sprang at him. She was aware that if she got close, the hammer's swing would be much weaker. One blow to her temple, however, proved to be very painful. "Who are you? What do you want?" she yelled as loudly as she could, overcoming the pain. But he didn't stop or respond. Susan's knees ached from multiple surgeries, and she was significantly shorter than the man at 164 centimeters, but she weighed more than the stranger. Susan threw her body at him, hoping to take advantage of this. He pushed her back against the wall, but he didn't fall. Then he said the one and only thing he would say that night: "You are strong." Susan felt her body tingle with adrenaline. She suddenly understood that the stranger had come to her house to murder her rather than rob her. His intentions were obvious, and she wasn't going to wait for it to happen, even though she didn't know why or who he was. For the second time, Susan shoved him. She yelled, "Who sent you?" once more. The only answer was silence. Luckily, the woman was able to knock the hammer out of his hand, and then hit him 3 or 4 times in the head. Susan caught him by the throat as he recovered control of the instrument. She interrupted his breathing with her hands and repeated, "Who sent you here?" The stranger's face first turned red, then purplish, and then nearly blue. In a panic, Susan released his throat. She just wanted to get out of there because she was tired and in pain. However, the man caught up to her before she could escape the bedroom and enter the small hallway. Her lip was smashed when he pushed and struck her. Even now, she is plagued by the memory of what transpired next. Susan looked down at the floor and thought she was going to die as he stood over her with the hammer. However, people needed to know that she battled for her life if death was her destiny. She was unable to describe how she did it, but she was able to knock the man down on the floor beside her and began biting him so that, should she die, her killer would be identified by her tooth marks. She rolled with the man on the floor, biting his hand, his thigh, and even ripping his pants zipper to get to his groin. For her, though, even that was insufficient. She felt the man's clothes with her hand in an attempt to find any identification or proof that she could conceal in a closet or beneath the bed for the police to find. For a full 14 minutes, the struggle went on. "Tell me who sent you here and I'll call an ambulance for you," she yelled as she threw her left leg over the intruder, climbed on top and put her left arm around his neck. He remained silent. Rather than letting her off his back, the intruder just growled. Susan pressed her hand more firmly against his throat as she leaned in. The man eventually ceased to move. Susan ran to the neighbor's house, grabbed his hammer, and dialed 911. When Susan's neighbor told the emergency dispatcher that the injured woman may have strangled an unidentified intruder who had broken into her home with the intention of killing her, the dispatcher was shocked. The neighbor clarified that Susan had put the man in a chokehold and repeatedly hit him with a hammer after the operator explained what the injured woman had done. The neighbor, who works as a nurse herself, responded that the man needed the ambulance when asked if the injured woman needed one. The dispatcher reassured the women that the ambulance was already en route and asked them to stop handling the hammer. Susan was taken to the hospital where she worked by the paramedics who arrived. Her worst fears were validated at that point. The man who had attacked her was dead, she found out. The identity of the man was quickly established by investigators. In his back pocket, they discovered an identification card. The police had been keeping an eye on Ed Haffey, a 59-year-old Viet. While Susan was being treated, she began to reflect on her life and try to figure out who could have wanted her dead. Susan had a difficult upbringing. Despite their love for her, her parents were unable to provide personal examples of what a successful marriage looked like. Their lives were very hectic because her father was an Air Force chef and her mother was a stay-at-home mom. The family had to constantly adjust to new homes and schools after moving from Colorado to Arizona, California, and Nevada. When Susan was in the second grade, her parents got divorced. Susan's romantic life took a turn in the early 1980 when she moved to Oregon and began working as a nurse. Susan's mother and friend sponsored a newspaper ad in 1988 announcing that she was prepared for a committed relationship. The ad was written in Susan's usual light-hearted and upbeat style. Mike Kuhnhausen, 39, wrote that he loved nothing more than strolling along the beach at sunset in one of the many responses she received. Mike spent a lot of time talking on the phone. He spoke in a pleasant tone and didn't hesitate to bring up weighty subjects. They threw unsalted peanuts to squirrels and fed ducks on their first date in February 1988 at the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. They were married within a year. However, things weren't always easy in their marriage. The days of taking long walks in the park were over. Although Susan was the primary provider for the family, her husband disapproved of her spending time with friends and insisted on an accounting for every dollar spent. Susan soon discovered that her husband had never been content and didn't think he could make her happy, and they didn't have any kids. Mike eventually got a job at a business that sold adult videos at one of its locations. However, Susan decided she had had enough after 17 years of marriage. Although she no longer wanted to live with her husband, she still cared for him. She desired to experience joy once more. She asked him to leave the house in September 2005. Mike went to live with his father. That being said, they remained friendly, and he frequently came over to visit Susan's cats. As a result, Susan made the grave error of failing to update the locks or the alarm code, which was 1210, the day of their wedding. Susan went home to collect her belongings the very next day following the attack, accompanied by her friend Helen Ballone. A backpack that shouldn't have been in the basement was discovered by Helen. Like any other basement, Susan's was filled with a wide range of items, so the police were unaware of the backpack. Dessert syrup, diabetes medicine, $200 in cash, a journal, and a receipt for a payment made to Ed Haffey were all found inside the backpack. The diary entry, from September 4, 2006, states that Mike was supposed to get a call from the man. Mike's new mobile number was also included. According to the autopsy, Haffey had taken a nearly fatal amount of illegal drugs prior to breaking into Susan's home. Although his family told the police that he was a successful tennis player and came from a wealthy family, the man had recently been living in a trailer. But 15 years ago, Haffey did something horrible. He planned the murder of Georgia Lee Dutton, 39, his ex-girlfriend, in 1991 near Roseburg. In the Umpqua River, her body was discovered. After acknowledging his guilt, Haffey was imprisoned for the next 9 years. He relocated to Portland after being released in November 2003, where he naturally began looking for work. When Mike Kuhnhausen hired him to clean the floors of an adult video store in July 2004, he discovered it. The police learned that Mike had traveled to the coast and stayed at the Lincoln City Inn on the day of Susan's attack. He went back to Portland during the night and bought a Taurus .357 Magnum revolver from a pawn shop the next day. Mike ran away after leaving a parting note at his father's home on September 8 that read, "All I wanted was to be loved, and every time I achieved that, I ruined everything." His arrest warrant was issued by the police. He was arrested on September 13 in the Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center parking lot, where Mike said he planned to go to the psychiatric clinic for assistance. He expressed to the officers, his sense of meaninglessness in life. His claims of innocence were not taken seriously by the police. Mike Kuhnhausen had lost his job a few weeks earlier and was living on the streets. Mike knew that Susan had named her brother as the beneficiary of her insurance policy in case she passed away. But Mike and Susan had paid off the $300,000 mortgage on their home, and if Susan passed away, it would still belong to him. Mike first claimed he didn't even know Haffey, but the detectives had already gotten company records to support their claim. Mike acknowledged that he was acquainted with Ed Haffey, but that did not imply that he had done anything wrong. Other evidence, however, surfaced that suggested the two men were conspiring. Records from the security system indicated that someone had turned off the alarm while Susan was at work, but there were no indications of forced entry into the house. Mike denied allowing Haffey to enter the house, but he did say he had turned it off when he left the note. However, Haffey's former accomplice called the police on September 18 to report that Haffey had asked him to participate in an insurance fraud scheme. He described how he and Haffey met with the town's contractor, Mike Kuhnhausen, who offered the man $5,000 in exchange for helping Haffey murder his wife. Naturally, the man declined. Another witness reported to the police on November 17 that he had escorted Haffey to a parking lot where he met a bald man. After the assault on Susan, he saw the man's picture on the news a few days later. Mike Kuhnhausen was the one. Despite Mike's best efforts to deny it, the evidence against him was growing, and on August 30, 2007, he admitted to ordering the murder of his wife. "You wanted me to share a life with you until death do us part. Turns out, you were hoping the sooner it happened the better. If I believed you deserved to die, I would have had the courage to do it myself," Susan said on the stand during the trial. Mike was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Susan filed a lawsuit for $1 million right after the sentencing to make sure he wouldn't have enough money left for another contract. The scheduled date of Mike's release was September 14, 2014. His former spouse was prepared for it. The new Susan, who had once been lively and daring, became very wary. She sat with her back to the door in restaurants. She started taking a different route to work, and she would circle the block for a while if she thought someone might be pursuing her in an attempt to ward them off. In Portland, she relocated to a new home on a gravel-lined dead-end street where she could hear footsteps if someone came to the window or door. She also practiced shooting in the garage next door. "I'm serving a life sentence for choosing the wrong husband," she quipped. Susan did everything she could to make sure Mike would never be able to harm her, but her ex-husband was never given the opportunity. 92 days prior to his release, he passed away from cancer on Friday, June 13, 2014. The prisoner's letters reveal that he only confessed to the crime in order to avoid a longer sentence and never really admitted his guilt. Mike thought he was the true victim of the incident. Susan acknowledges that she mourns his life, which he could have had if he had only let those who loved him into his heart, rather than his departure. She also laments that he passed away in prison, far from all of his loved ones. Since it is difficult for a victim of crime to get the information they need, Susan looked for information about Mike's release and her rights following his release while he was incarcerated. As a result, in 2017, she and the district attorney's office developed Case Companion, a free website devoted to helping local crime victims. It provides answers to all of the victims' inquiries concerning the legal system. Victims can also follow the defendant's court dates, sentencing information, and the date of the convicted person's release after the district attorney's office files charges. Susan kept up her nursing career until December 2014. Since saving lives was the focus of her work, she was long perplexed as to why her coworkers referred to her as a hero. They called her a hero not because she killed someone, but because they want to believe that if they were in a similar situation, they would also be able to survive, her supervisor explained to her. Susan can't recall what happened without crying, even after all these years. She acknowledges that she thought of Haffey's family right away after learning of his passing. Everyone has someone who loves them, children, a wife, a mother, a father. The worst part of what happened is not that someone tried to kill me, but that I had to kill someone to survive. But I'm not ashamed because I didn't choose his death. I chose my life. I chose to live. Although what happened was terrible, no one in this family thinks poorly of you. You did what you had to do, and by doing so you protected many from a similar fate. Susan finds comfort in helping others, knowing that they can also survive after an attack. Aunt Ada Duffy wrote her a letter in 2010 after learning about her suffering. "If you can't run and can't hide, you have to fight," she states. "You can't know that you won't survive." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On May 13, 2015, around 5 p.m., firefighters extinguished a raging fire in a garage by the road in the village of Sand Lake, Michigan. At that moment, a terrified woman dashed up to their car, screaming that her neighbors had died. Several firefighters accompanied the woman to her neighbor's house. 2 lifeless bodies lay on the bedroom floor in a pool of blood. It appeared that they'd been shot. To preserve the evidence at the crime scene, the firefighters avoided touching anything and immediately informed the police that they had discovered 2 bodies and needed investigators and forensic experts. Forensic experts had been at the crime scene for about an hour, collecting evidence and photographing the bodies of 46-year-old Martin Durham and 47-year-old Glenna Durham, when one officer noticed a small movement in Glenna's chest. He rushed to her body and attempted to feel for a pulse, but Glenna's eyes opened wide and she sat up abruptly, screaming, "What are you doing, Marty?" The officer immediately summoned paramedics, who transported the injured woman to the local hospital. Marty and Glenna met as teenagers in the early 1980 SS. Marty invited the girl on a date to a local open-air theater, where they both lost their virginity in the same evening, with little interest in the film itself. Their relationship progressed quickly and passionately, but it ended after a few months, in part because Glenna, 17, married soon after. Marty started a family on his own. Christina Keller was 14 years old when she met Marty, then 19, at a party at his house. The young man appeared charming and amusing to the girl, but also a little strange because he immediately declared that he would marry her someday. Marty arrived on her doorstep the following day. He must have made a good impression on Christina's parents, because he has never left her life since. Their friendship turned into a romantic relationship, and Christina, then 16, discovered she was expecting their first child. Within 2 years, she was carrying their second son, prompting the young couple to marry. Christina and her husband had a daughter 11 months later. Christina was 19 and Marty was 24 at the time. Initially, the young family lived with relatives, but in early 1995, Marty secured a higher-paid job at a factory in Michigan, and the family of 5 relocated. However, Marty was involved in a car accident on the evening of February 16, 1995, on his way home from work. Another vehicle speeding through a red light collided with his vehicle. The larger vehicle nearly crushed Marty's car, trapping him inside. Marty was transported to the hospital, where he had been clinically dead for approximately 5 minutes. He suffered severe injuries to his left side and was in a coma for more than 3 weeks. When he regained consciousness, he had no memory of his wife, children, or much of his previous life. He spent 1.5 years learning to walk, speak, eat, and care for himself again. Christina provided physical support for him during this time. Marty began to resemble his former self, but psychologically he had changed. He became enraged as a result of the brain trauma. He never fought with his wife or children, but he became a domineering figure. Even his sense of humor grew darker. Christina filed for divorce in 2000, nearly 5 years after the accident. She still cared deeply for her husband, but her feelings had shifted to a more maternal nature, as she had taken on the role of his caregiver and could no longer relate to him in any other way. Marty purchased his first home in May 2001 using funds from the insurance company and a bank loan. The house was located in Sand Lake, Michigan, a small village with a population of 500 people. Marty was overjoyed with his new home, which he had moved into with his 2 sons and an African gray parrot named Bud. 2 months after moving in, Marty received a knock on his door from a 16-year-old girl claiming to be his daughter. Marty inquired as to her mother's identity, and Glenna, his first love, revealed herself. The girl knew her mother had an affair early in their marriage, and she was born a few months after. She wished to establish her paternity for certain. A DNA test confirmed that the girl was Marty's biological daughter, born outside of marriage. Clearly, Glenna had never forgotten Marty. as she had a tattoo of his name on her arm throughout their marriage. Glenna divorced her husband and moved in with Marty. They were very happy together and they quickly had a new wedding ceremony. Glenna's new husband was everything to her. The couple spent their entire time together, visiting family and going to the local casino once or twice a week. Glenna would sit in the car and read a novel while Marty went hunting. Glenna was paid $3,200 per month to care for her husband, after officially taking on the responsibility. Marty received more than $1,000 in disability benefits each month. Glenna also sold Marty's excess medication, bringing their total monthly income to around $5,000. When Marty's sons moved out, this income was enough to support them in the small village. However, by 2010, Marty's mental and physical health had deteriorated significantly. The couple continued to spend their entire time together and with their friends, including Connie and Keith Ream, another neighboring couple. On Monday, May 11, 2015, Marty offered to mow Connie and Keith's backyard. He enjoyed the work and did it for free. Later that evening, Connie, Keith, Marty, and Glenna sat on the neighbor's terrace, and the Durhams returned home around 9 p.m. Keith sent Marty a message the next day, Tuesday at 8:26 a.m., asking how he was feeling, but he did not receive a response. This was strange because Marty was always quick to return calls and messages. Throughout the day, Keith sent several more messages to his friend, all with the same result. Later that day, Connie approached her neighbor's door and knocked. She heard the Durham's dog bark, but no one opened the door. Keith even sent a joking message to Glenna, asking, "What did you do to Marty?" But she didn't respond either. On Wednesday at 7:30 a.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house again and rang the doorbell. The only response she got was the dog barking. She walked around the house, checking for any open doors or windows. Everything remained locked as usual. Throughout the day, Connie and Keith attempted to contact their neighbors, growing increasingly concerned. After work, around 4:30 p.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house for the third time and knocked. She assumed she'd have to break the door, but when she touched the handle, she discovered it wasn't locked. This time, Connie cautiously opened the door and called out for the neighbors, but she was only greeted by the Durham family pet, who led her into the living room, which was a gruesome mess. Documents and photographs were all over the place, along with a broken lamp and other miscellaneous items. Connie followed Shelby into the bedroom and discovered the homeowners lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Marty was only wearing underwear, whereas Glenna was fully dressed, her legs covered by a blanket. Connie dashed out of the neighbor's house and ran toward a fire truck she saw further down the road. Marty did not have the same luck as his wife. He was shot 5 times in the back, forearm, and chest, leaving him with no chance of survival. He'd been dead for a few days. Glenna was shot twice, both times hitting the area behind her right ear. Blood was discovered not only in the bedroom, but also on a chair in the living room and a pillow with 2 bullet holes. Under the chair, a gun and 2 empty shells were discovered. In the bedroom, there were 5 more shell casings, 1 near the door and 4 near Marty's body, for a total of 7. However, the gun found near the chair was designed to fire 6 bullets. This indicates that the perpetrator had time to reload the gun before continuing to shoot. Aside from the living room and bedroom, the rest of the house appeared to be in perfect order. There were no signs of forced entry, and the kitchen table was set with a bowl of spaghetti and a piece of garlic bread. Later that evening, when Glenna was taken to the hospital, Marty's children were allowed to bring the family pets, a dog and a parrot, to their mother's home, Christina. Despite the fact that the children were only allowed to take the pets, the trio took advantage of the opportunity to search the house and discovered a sealed envelope labeled "Personal." Inside, they discovered letters from Glenna addressed to her children and ex-husband. In the letters, she expressed her love for the children and apologized for not being the best mother. She also asked her ex-husband to care for the children. In Glenna's drawer, they also discovered a packet of unpaid bills. They handed over all of their findings to the police. The investigators began questioning the family's relatives and friends about their personal and financial situations. They enjoyed spending time together and became completely absorbed in each other's company. However, it quickly became clear that they were having serious financial difficulties. Glenna was in charge of the family's finances, and relatives suspected Marty was unaware of the gravity of the situation because he was so frugal. On the other hand, Glenna had developed a serious gambling addiction. She would buy hundreds of lottery tickets and lose thousands of dollars at the casino. But whenever her husband approached her, she pretended to be playing with $1 bills. Glenna played every week, and in 2010, she spent $75,000 on her addiction. The family had fallen behind on tax payments, had credit card debt, and Marty's car was about to be repossessed. However, their most pressing concern was their home. Glenna hadn't made mortgage payments in over a year, and they owed $48,000. Marty's mother saw a list of homes that would be seized due to debts in early April 2015, a few weeks before the family was attacked. Marty's address was on the list. She called Glenna, who assured her that the newspaper had printed the incorrect address and that she would resolve the issue. Of course, it turned out that their home was being repossessed. Despite the fact that Marty had taken out a mortgage, Glenna received notice on April 28 that their home would be auctioned if they did not pay $5,000. Interestingly, the auction was scheduled for May 12th, just one day before Marty and Glenna were discovered by their neighbor. The investigators concluded that Marty was unaware of the impending loss of their home because he had been renovating it for the previous 2 months. He painted the bathroom just 2 days before they died. Glenna was able to regain consciousness after 3 days in intensive care. She had no recollection of the day of the murders or the days before. She couldn't remember writing the letters to her children or ex-husband. Because the eyewitness couldn't provide any useful information, the police had few leads or clues to work with. Marty, an avid hunter, frequently showed his firearms to friends, so the weapon contained multiple DNA samples. Glenna and Marty did, however, sell drugs for cash, and large sums of money were kept in envelopes in a safe. Could it have been an unplanned robbery? The living room was in disarray, as if someone had been looking for something and the money from the safe was missing. This version of events appeared to be the most plausible, but finding the killer among their illegal clients was like looking for a needle in a haystack. It took a full year before an unexpected witness helped solve the case. Bud, a 19-year-old parrot, had been living with Christina for the previous 12 months. Bud was an African gray parrot with the unique ability to mimic not only sounds and words in his environment, but also human voices. Originally, he was Christina's beloved pet, but Marty took him, presumably to retaliate against his ex-wife for leaving. When Bud returned to his beloved owner, he began repeating various conversations he had overheard while living with Marty, such as how Marty interacted with the dog. However, at some point, he started repeating an argument between a man and a woman. They were clearly arguing with one another, raising their voices and occasionally mixing profanity with everyday words. At the end of the conversation, a male voice said loudly, "No, don't shoot." Christina recorded this scene performed by the parrot on video, but did not report it to the police because she assumed it would be laughed off. However, a year after Marty's murder, a local journalist interviewed his mother, and she mentioned the video. The journalist became very interested and broadcast it on the news. The video quickly went viral, prompting the police to reopen the investigation and narrow their focus on one suspect, Glenna Durham. They examined Marty and Glenna's phones and discovered that Marty's last action on his phone was to search for information about lawnmowers on the evening of the 11th after returning home from the neighbors. The examination of Glenna's phone proved to be far more intriguing. It had been used until the 13th, when the bodies were discovered. Since 3:32 a.m., someone used the phone 5 times between 4 and 4:48 a.m. To learn more about the gun used in the shootings, including how to reload it, the final message was sent to Glenna's mother at 4:48 a.m. and said, "I love you, please forgive me." Glenna was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She maintained her innocence, and her lawyer attempted to show that another family member or a stranger had broken into the house to steal medication, cash, or Marty's weapons. However, the forensic experts found no evidence of forced entry into the house. What about the money from the safe? Marty's children had taken it while they were searching the house for Glenna, who had been taken to the hospital, and their father to the mortuary. When investigators discovered this, they claimed that no one had asked them about the money at the police station, so they did not say anything. In any case, the version of a robber was abandoned because nothing was stolen. The prosecution's version of events seemed much more plausible. They believed Marty was killed on the morning of the 12th because he was wearing underwear. When the man realized he was going to lose the house, he became very upset, and a heated argument ensued. Marty attempted to flee into the bedroom after Glenna grabbed the weapon. She shot him in the back. Marty was still on his feet, reaching for another weapon from the bedside table. Glenna fired again, striking his forearm. Only then did he turn to face her, and she fired 3 more shots into his chest. Marty lay lifeless on the bedroom floor. Glenna spent the entire day completing paperwork. She wrote letters to her ex-husband and children and made spaghetti for lunch. Glenna was still engaged in these activities when the neighbor first arrived at her house on the evening of the 12th. Glenna planned her next steps, knowing that her and Marty's neighbors would become concerned regardless. She needed to act fast. She sat in a chair in the living room, placed a pillow against her head, and fired. However, nothing occurred. The pillow absorbed the impact of the shot, and the bullet only grazed her. She had to look up how to reload the pistol because it was down to its last bullet. This means she didn't try again until the early morning of the 13th, when she sent a message to her mother. Perhaps she still had doubts when Connie knocked on the door again at 7:30 a.m. and found it still locked. But after Connie left, Glenna must have unlocked the door, sat in the chair, grabbed the pillow, and tried again. This time, the injury was more severe, but her doctor later explained that she did not strike any important veins or arteries or penetrate the skull. It's difficult to imagine what condition she was in, but because head wounds always bleed profusely, she may have decided to simply bleed out. She made her way to the bedroom, where her husband's body had been lying all along, and collapsed on the floor, a blanket covering her legs. It's unclear whether she staged a scene when the police officer touched her or simply regained consciousness at that point, and we may never find out, because Glenna continues to claim memory loss. The jury believed the prosecution's version. On Wednesday, July 19, 2017, after 9 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty of murder. Glenna Durham was sentenced to life imprisonment. Of course, the parrot named Bud was not called as a witness in court, and it's not because he swears a lot. It is simply impossible to prove that he did not hear that particular dialogue on television or radio, let alone take an oath on the witness stand. In other words, if Bud had been involved in the process and it had been less than 24 hours since Glenna's guilty verdict, her lawyer would have filed an appeal. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A 19-year-old woman was discovered dead in her own apartment. Investigators quickly discovered several disturbing facts, but they were unable to solve the case for several years before revealing the truth. Everyone was shocked and outraged by the unexpected outcome. Nona Dismay was born December 26, 1985, in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father died. This event was a tragedy for the entire family, but they were about to receive an even more devastating shock. Later, the young woman told her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to violence. She was afraid to speak up while he was still alive, and her confession shocked her mother. Even after such a tragic experience, the woman had no idea what her husband was capable of. Nona found the strength to move on and eventually decided to assist other young women who had been victims of similar crimes. She joined a volunteer organization to help children in need during her school years. Nona started dating a guy named Kevin Jones. The young woman also competed in beauty contests and achieved significant success. Nona won several local contests, qualifying her to compete for the title of Miss Arkansas. In addition, the young woman was an active member of the local church and sang in the choir. When Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled in Arkansas, which launched an attack on a university in their hometown. The young woman decided to rent her own apartment because she wanted to start her own life. After her first year, her boyfriend changed his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour and a half away from their home. By then, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and this was their first time living in different cities. Kevin returned home for the Christmas holiday. He stopped by Nona's apartment before driving to his parents' house, which was about 16 kilometers away from the city. The following day, they both had plans. Nona had to take her final 2 exams while also meeting with a young woman from the volunteer organization. Kevin planned to take his mother, a librarian, to a school event on December 15th, around 9 a.m. Nona messaged Kevin, wishing him a good day. He was expecting Nona to call him after her exams and tell him how they went, but she wasn't returning his calls or messages, so he became concerned around 6 p.m. While attending a school event with his mother, Kevin couldn't help but wonder why Nona hadn't answered her phone all day. Kevin eventually decided to call his friend, who worked as a pizza deliveryman in the neighborhood where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to come by and see if everything was fine. His friend arrived quickly and noticed that Nona's car was parked in the parking lot, and the lights in her apartment were turned on, but no one was answering the door. He told Kevin about it, and Kevin told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to go to her apartment to make sure everything was fine. The woman agreed, and they headed to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and the 3 of them began knocking on the door, but there was no response. Kevin had a key, but he left it at home that day because he had no intention of stopping by. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend attempted to open the front door because they suspected something bad had happened to Nona, but they were unable to do so. Kevin then remembered that there were sliding glass doors in the back of the apartment. When he approached them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nona was concerned about her own safety, so she installed a special removable grill on the back glass door whenever she was alone at home. They are primarily used against burglars. They are simple to install and remove from within the home, but extremely difficult to do from the outside. But this time, there was no grill, and the doors were unlocked. When they entered the apartment, they noticed blood on the blinds and discovered a shocking sight in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing only socks. Kevin rushed over to her and attempted to lift her, only to realize she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother contacted police investigators, who arrived at the apartment and began investigating the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim had been struck on the head several times with a table lamp found on the floor. Investigators discovered a bloody fingerprint on the table lamp, possibly left by the killer next to the victim's body. They also found an empty condom wrapper on the bedside table and no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners confirmed that the table lamp was used as a weapon, with the metal base matching. Experts suggest that the perpetrator may have used a condom found in the apartment, making it difficult to determine the presence of sexual violence. However, the crime scene was not thoroughly examined, with investigators failing to collect blood samples from the blinds on the back door or search for shoe prints in the apartment, which could have been used. When he entered the apartment and ran to her, he tried to lift her up, and upon realizing that she was dead, he hugged and held her. The police found this behavior strange and suspected that Kevin had done it deliberately by hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood he may have destroyed. Potential evidence and compromised the crime scene, why it would be difficult for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if Kevin's clothes or nails were found with the victim's blood, it could easily be explained that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious moment was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone but with his mother, and he also invited his friend to the apartment. Investigators believed that this way he secured 2 witnesses who found the body with him and saw him covered in blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nona's apartment, and from their questions the young man realized that they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that strengthened the investigators' conviction that he was the murderer, recognizing that he was suspected. Kevin began arguing with the investigators, stating that he constantly watches Law and Order and is aware that they are attempting to convict him. These words also appear strange to the police. In addition, they discovered that the key to Nona's apartment was only with 3 people: the girlfriend, her mother, and Kevin. Given the lack of evidence of a break-in, they assumed the man used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was interrogated at the police station for several hours. During the interrogation, he told investigators his version of events and insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. However, investigators directly accused him of the murder and urged him to confess. Around 4 p.m., after numerous attempts to call his girlfriend, Kevin sent a message asking if she was still alive, despite the fact that Nona had already died. When the police left the interrogation room and left Kevin alone, he stood up and began punching the back of the chair for the investigators. This became another indication that the young man was violent and capable of murder. However, The police found no evidence linking Kevin to the murder. Medical experts discovered that Nona attempted to defend herself, which would have resulted in bruises and scratches on the killer's body, but none were found on Kevin. Despite this, the detectives remained convinced he was guilty and attempted to gather evidence. After interviewing over 50 people, the police were unable to find any witnesses. However, after speaking with known friends, they discovered that shortly before her death, she had begun seeing another man secretly from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder, which raised suspicions about Kevin. She was killed with extreme cruelty, which in most similar cases indicates the killer's strong personal animosity toward the victim. A few days later, Kevin agreed to take a polygraph test. The operator concluded that the young man provided numerous false answers, and one of the investigators claimed that this was the worst polygraph result he had ever seen in his 28 years of experience. However, there is one caveat: the person who read the device's readings was not a certified specialist. He was simply a police officer who had not received the necessary training to work with this device, which did not bother the detectives. Following the interrogation, they increased the pressure on Kevin, attempting to force a confession. They claimed that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he killed Nona. The police really told everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven, and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he was the one who killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it. Until the end, the day before the funeral, a farewell ceremony was supposed to take place in the church, and Kevin had been helping to organize it since early in the morning. Later on, detectives called him in for questioning again, promising to release him before the start of the ceremony. In the end, Kevin spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. Nobody present knew he was being questioned, so many assumed that Kevin didn't show up due to guilt over what had happened. Nona's parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin still came and sat far away from her relatives. After examining evidence from the victim's apartment, experts discovered a fingerprint on the light bulb in the desk lamp. The fingerprint was left by blood, indicating that it could only have been made during or after the murder. Despite this, investigators continued to search for Kevin for months. This request was granted, and the trial began in a different city. The defense called a witness who provided Kevin with a solid alibi. A plumber had visited his parents' house that morning and saw him around 10:30 a.m. The prosecution insisted that Kevin had time to go to Nondes and commit the murder because, according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. They also shared an interesting fact: Kevin had turned off his phone between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., which coincided with the victim's murder. Furthermore, data from Kevin's phone revealed that he only began calling his girlfriend at 4 p.m., despite claims during questioning that he had been trying to reach her all day. However, at the time, the young man may have meant both calls and messages. Lawyers presented 2 additional witnesses, both of whom testified that Kevin did not commit the murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who stated that on that particular day, she saw her grandson near the gas station and gave him money to go have a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the man between 12:30 and 1 p.m. at the restaurant, and the establishment's cameras captured him eating lunch. As a result, the young man could not have committed the murder while simultaneously returning in time. Lawyers also questioned the possibility that Kevin left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder. In that case, when the body was discovered, the blood should have dried up. Experts who came to the apartment that evening wrote in the report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp, confirming that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nona's body with his mother and friend. However, fingerprints were also found on the table lamp that was used to hit the victim, but they did not belong to Kevin. He determined that after death, the victim's body lay on her back for some time before being turned face down. This could imply that the young woman is still subjected to violence. The expert confirmed that he found no direct evidence of this, but added that he could not rule out such a possibility. The prosecution claimed that no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive package found next to the victim's body. However, a retest revealed male DNA, which did not belong to Kevin and did not match any databases. The trial lasted over a year and was concluded by the jury in July 2007. And now that he had avoided punishment despite their client's acquittal, the legal team promised to keep working on the case and find the true killer. Given the police's obsession with Kevin, no one expected them to finally do their job correctly. The lawyers first extracted DNA from the contraceptive packaging. Compared to all the men who knew Nona, all of these people volunteered to provide samples, and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until an unexpected event occurred in September 2007. When the police arrested Gary Dunn for robbery, things became more interesting. First, this man had previously been convicted of assaulting another woman. Second, he lived in the same housing complex as Nona. In the early stages of the investigation, the police considered Gary as a suspect but quickly switched their focus to Kevin as the killer. The boy's lawyers requested a DNA test, which revealed that a sample from the contraceptive packaging matched Gary's DNA. After the young woman's murder, investigators even questioned Gary using a polygraph. Gary did go shopping with his mother, just not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before, as evidenced by receipts with purchase dates, which Gary even showed to the police, but they simply ignored such important information. They noticed that the dates on the checks did not match the day of the murder. This was stated in the reports, but for unknown reasons, they either ignored it or failed to notice that the days did not match. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints to those of unknown table lamps, and they matched. However, a serious issue arose here. The fingerprints and DNA matched, but not completely. The judicial system follows certain guidelines. In Gary's case, the necessary coincidence indicators for determining guilt were insufficient, despite the fact that the DNA and fingerprints were unlikely to belong to someone else. The investigators were likely guilty because they did not thoroughly examine all available evidence immediately after the murder, as required by the rules. It is possible that the DNA samples deteriorated. He was on parole in 2002. He attacked a woman who was running in the park, knocked her down, and began beating her, threatening to kill her. The woman escaped and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the scene but was quickly apprehended. The man served 19 months in prison and was released early. Interestingly, his DNA sample was not included in the database. Gary's trial began in April 2010, and there were plenty of surprises in store for everyone. His own wife testified against him, claiming he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary frequently raised his hand against her, and the woman was terrified for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most intriguing detail was that, a few weeks before the victim's death, she noticed her husband spying on Nona through her apartment window. Based on this, the prosecution assumed that the man planned the attack because of his criminal history. Gary had a history of violence, and he may have been keeping a close eye on Nona because she lived only a few meters away. On December 15th, he decided to act. He allegedly knocked on her apartment door and entered under false pretenses, grabbing the table lamp and striking her several times before assaulting and killing her. Because Gary used contraception, medical experts were unable to definitively state whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all evidence pointed to it. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement, but he had no real alibi, so they concentrated on blaming Kevin, according to the lawyers. Kevin discovered that the young woman was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin had to testify in court and listen as they attempted to portray him as the true criminal. The prosecution was unable to use Gary's fingerprints or DNA as evidence, resulting in a mistrial. A new trial was soon held, with a key difference being testimony from a woman who Gary nearly killed in 2002. The woman described how the man attacked her and how she barely escaped. Despite this, the second trial was declared a mistrial. First, he tried to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she fought him back. A few hours later, Gary stripped in front of another woman in a mall parking lot and was quickly arrested. Given his criminal record, and the fact that he is practically known as killer, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum term. Gary was sentenced to 15 years in prison for 2 incidents and is still serving his sentence. Despite his right to petition for early release, authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. They also have the right to charge him with murder for the 3rd time, but they are not rushing to do so. The likelihood of the new trial ending in the same way as the previous 2 is high, so investigators are gathering more information. During the trial preparation, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph test results revealed lies, but investigators did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers did not face any consequences for allowing the real killer to roam free for years and may not be punished in the future. Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Horia and Bouvier, both foreign students, became friends while attending the Sorbonne in Paris. The girls studied the history, social and political movements and culture of the region because they were fervent about foreign cultures, particularly those of Latin America. Horia was 24 years old and was born in Morocco. She chose to set aside her books and travel to Argentina after finishing her thesis on the subject. At 29, Cassandra was accustomed to seeing the world, so she accepted her friend's invitation with pleasure. After packing their bags, the girls set out on a journey across the Caribbean basin, Central America, and South America. The friends traveled to Salta, a province in northwest Argentina with a fascinating history, geography, and social scene, in July 2011. The terrain varies from tropically dry plains in the east to snow-capped peaks in the west. Curiosity-driven students can explore and study the architecture, which includes churches and cathedrals constructed during the colonial era. It is important to note, though, that Salta upholds conservative traditions, much like many northern provinces in the nation, and most likely throughout Latin America. The distinctions between social classes are noticeable, and the Catholic Church has a big impact on people's daily lives. A small number of powerful families have dominated politics for many years. It should be noted that the details will become clearer as this story develops. Since they intended to return to Buenos Aires, Cassandra and Horia checked into a hotel in Salta on July 15 and left to explore the sites without unpacking. A popular tourist destination, Salta is renowned for its low crime rate and welcoming locals, particularly to visitors. The natural reserve known as Quebrada de San Lorenzo is Salta's main draw. The girls bought tickets to the reserve at precisely 4:23 p.m. on July 15. Instead of hiring a guide, they went far into the forest. They were expected to get in touch with their families from Buenos Aires and let them know which city they would be visiting next, but there was no word from them. Unable to handle the uncertainty, their families contacted Cassandra and Horia's Argentinian acquaintances on the 19th and requested that they call the police. 2 weeks later, a group of visitors from a nearby town followed the French girls' path. Although it was not uncommon in this region, they reached the reserve rather late in the evening. One of the tourists broke away from the others at around 6 p.m. in order to locate a private area in the thickets. He saw what appeared to be a body there. He screamed and hurried back to the group to tell them about his discovery, after approaching and verifying that it was, in fact, a body. Around 10 p.m., the police showed up at the reserve. The tourists had only noted that the body was close to a viewpoint. They had not marked the precise spot where they discovered it. As a result, the police first had trouble finding it in the dark and among the thickets. The body was eventually located, but before they could start their work, they found 2 more victims a short distance away. It was the 2 French tourists who had gone missing. Given that many people in the area hunt for food, the police came up with a number of theories, one of which was that the girls might have been unintentionally shot by a local hunter. Thus, locals were the target of the search. Francisco Toheder, a tourist guide for horseback riding, was taken into custody by the police. But since there was no proof linking him to the crime, he was freed a few days later. The police needed a scapegoat to placate the public, so his wife told the media that her husband was arrested only because they were impoverished. The police told the media right away after the bodies were found that they had been lying in the forest for roughly 3 days. There were several theories as to what might have happened to the girls during the remaining days when they were reported missing, because they had retained their tickets to the reserve for the 15th. There was conjecture that they were abducted, held captive, and subsequently disposed of. The police later explained that the girls had been lying in the reserve close to the viewpoint for 14 days before they were killed. There were rumors of violence against the girls because of Cassandra's ripped clothes, and Horia's pants and underwear being pulled down to her knees. This was verified by the autopsy. The tourists were sexually assaulted, severely beaten, and then shot with a .22 caliber gun. The police discovered a matching shell casing in the reserve. They went back to the reserve's entrance after determining that the girls had successfully gone for a walk. There weren't many people there because it was getting late and the weather wasn't suitable for strolls. The perpetrator or perpetrators obviously approached their victims at that point, and one of them assaulted Cassandra. The girl was kneeling in front of her killer when she was shot in the head, following the abuse she had endured. After witnessing Cassandra's murder, Horia made the decision to persevere. She struggled with at least one attacker, as evidenced by the clump of hair that remained in her clenched fist. Then, based on the investigators' assumptions, the girl was shot and ran down the slope from the height. It went through her shoulder and struck her in the back. The criminals departed, thinking Horia was done as well. She tried to crawl back to the trail, but she was still alive. Her efforts were in vain, however, for she was too feeble and suffered for several more hours before passing away from blood loss. When the investigators looked through the girl's hotel room, they discovered that there was only one phone among their possessions, rather than the two they had anticipated. They found that a local girl named Maria Fernanda Canyons, RS, the daughter of a former police officer, was using Horia's phone after tracking it down. They also discovered that Horia was in possession of her camera. According to the girl, these were presents from Gustavo Lassi, her boyfriend. The 23-year-old Gustavo was a guide in the reserve, and his father was a tourist ticket vendor. Gustavo had offered the French girls his services, but they turned him down. Gustavo thought that changing the SIM card in the phone would be sufficient to evade detection. Gustavo Lassi admitted to being at the crime scene and taking part in the violence, though not right away. He asserted, however, that he was only a witness and neither the murderer nor the instigator of the French girls. He described how, after hearing a commotion and rushing to the cries, he saw two men, a stonemason named Daniel Vilt, 24, and a gardener from the plains of San Lorenzo named Santos Clemente Vera, 31, tormenting the girls. These men allegedly forced him to take part in the violence before letting him go. He did, however, remember to bring the girl's camera and phone. The gun that fired the deadly shots was found by the police during a search of Gustavo's house. The police were able to determine the precise moment of the attack on the French girls thanks to Horia's camera. Before starting their hike through the reserve, the girls took a few pictures while they were sightseeing. The tourists' final photograph, taken at 6:28 p.m., 2 hours and 5 minutes later, was hazy and ambiguous, leading investigators to surmise that the attack happened at that exact moment. Murder charges were brought against all three men. Witnesses came forward right away and identified Vilt as the individual who tried to sell a rifle. But since he was at a bank when the attack happened and could provide proof, he had a strong alibi. Vera was freed because of insufficient evidence and his denial of guilt, while Gustavo Lassi was sentenced to 30 years in prison in 2014. He said he had an alibi too. Both men were given life sentences in prison in 2016, though, after the prosecutor insisted on a review of the case. One of the most well-known cases in Argentine history appeared to have come to an end. The story doesn't stop there, though. The case was investigated by French journalist Jean-Charles Chattard, who spent 4 years writing a book outlining his reasons why the girls could not have been killed on July 15 in the nature reserve, as the investigators claim. The journalist is certain that the girls' bodies were just taken to the reserve following the murder, not that they perished there. First of all, in contrast to the victim's shoes, his were covered in dust and dirt even after a brief stroll through the reserve. Such a path, enduring violence, fighting for their lives, and still having clean shoes would have been impossible for the girls. Second, the tourists' overall appearance was peculiar. They weren't dressed for a hike in the nature reserve, but rather for an evening event in the city. The bodies were left in Quebrada de San Lorenzo for 2 weeks, which is the next oddity. The reserve is an open, wild place where condors, foxes, and pumas live. The police might have discovered fully gnawed bones after such a time. Despite the fact that the bodies were found in a well-known reserve close to a popular viewpoint, they were found to be spotless. Last but not least, the pathologist who examined the bodies declared with confidence that they were killed no more than 3 to 5 days prior to the autopsy. The doctor was categorical when it came to the date of the murders, stating in the report that it was July 26, 2011. Interestingly, this date was rescheduled for July 15 by the investigating judge. Is there any chance that the judge purposefully falsified the facts in order to shield someone? Was he attempting to falsify the evidence? The commissioner in charge of the investigation, Nestor Piccolo, was persuaded of this very thing, and it might have cost him his life. 4 months after the investigation began, Commissioner Piccolo passed away, inexplicably. He was discovered with a bullet wound to his head at the commissioner's office entrance. Although his mother claimed that her son made the decision, she is positive that he was executed. Nestor was developing a new version prior to his passing, and no signs of gunpowder were discovered on his hands. Clemente Vera claims that Gustavo Lossi is merely an accomplice of the true criminals, who are representatives of the province's upper classes, and that he is innocent. Many people, including the judge and powerful local families, were concerned about Nestor's investigation because they did not want the truth to be revealed and could not permit the deaths of the French girls to come to light. But in April 2014, an anonymous letter detailing the same trail that Commissioner Piccolo was looking into broke this conspiracy of silence. The families of the victims in France received the letter. After obtaining a copy, Chittard followed up on this lead. A woman who was afraid to testify in court wrote the anonymous letter by hand but did not sign it. After several months, Chittard was able to locate the witness. It turned out to be a girl who frequently hangs out with a select group of powerful people in Salta. She was aware that since the two tourists had been invited to a party hosted by the city's affluent youth on July 15, 2011, they could not have been murdered in the nature reserve. Her account of what transpired is entirely different. Alcohol is served freely at these parties, and everything seems like it's from a movie. But it's all real. The girl claimed that Cassandra and Horia were among the visitors, and that they were spotted close to the pool. The men's interest in the gorgeous French women grew as the evening went on, and more alcohol was consumed. They led them inside the house at around 3 in the morning, and nobody saw them again. One of the tourists was being harassed by the guys. She refused, of course, but things went too far and the men no longer cared about her opinion. In order to keep the truth from coming to light, the guys chose to murder both of them after her friends saw what transpired. They took their time, though, torturing the victims for days before killing them. The witness gave the precise address of the alleged incident, a villa in Buena Vista, the city's most upscale neighborhood where ministers, deputies, and affluent foreigners live. Since the villa is frequently rented out to private parties, it is typically not occupied permanently. Additionally, the French women were last spotted in a pool. The villa's location, directly beneath the bodies, is the most fascinating aspect, though. A secret trail leads to the nature reserve's lookout point behind the house. If the witness's account is accurate, the girls' bodies were transported through that path during the night and dumped in the thickets of the reserve. But how could such a crazy situation that was taking place in full view at a party be kept a secret for so long? According to the witness, it can be explained by the fear that actual criminals instill in anyone who has the audacity to speak up. She claimed that the son of a deputy who assaulted the French woman was responsible for organizing the party. He severely beat her when she attempted to flee. The politician's 2 other sons also participated in the attack and subsequent killing. Today, during his most recent election campaign, the deputy's face calmly gazes down from a number of billboards. It should be noted that one of his sons became a politician, just like his father. One judge who oversaw the initial investigation expressed a great deal of interest in the story told in the anonymous letter, but the politician declined to comment on these claims. He thinks it has everything needed to bring about justice. The judge who later took over the case, however, had no plans to look for additional offenders. He blames the deaths of the French women on the provincial justice system and thinks that the family must have a lot of power to influence the police. The witness's account that he witnessed the 2 French women departing the nature reserve on July 15 is given more credence in the updated version. This implies that the crime might have taken place at a different time and location than the investigators maintain. Regarding the hazy photos purportedly taken during the assault in the nature reserve, Cassandra's father, Jean-Michel Bouvier, sent them to a specialist who thinks they were altered with a photo editing application. The lighting and shot angle are not as accurate as the picture shows. The families of the victims in France no longer hold the legal system to any standards. Jean-Michel Bouvier examined his daughter's body and performed his own independent DNA analysis. The most private areas were found to contain the DNA of Gustavo Lossi, 2 other men, and 1 woman, The sample from Clemente Vera was nowhere to be found. Uncertainty surrounding the ownership of the remaining samples raises concerns about Gustavo Lossi's actual involvement in the attack on the girls, as well as the identities of the other participants. Meanwhile, Clemente Vera's parents' modest house still stands in the center of San Lorenzo, just a few hundred meters from the location where Cassandra and Horia's bodies were discovered. They struggle to make ends meet after their son's arrest, because they are too old to work the land or take care of the animals. Many locals, including Clemente's wife and parents, maintain his innocence. They think his only fault is that he didn't have the money to hire lawyers and lived close to the crime scene. The fact that there is no evidence linking him to the crime in the case files makes it all the more tragic. According to him, the police demanded a confession to the murder, beat him, and threatened him and his child. They searched his home for any incriminating evidence after he refused to comply, but they were unable to find any. Regarding this, Santos Clemente Vera complained to the Supreme Court of Argentina in 2017 and was given permission for a case review in June 2020. He hopes that a new trial will be held and that he will be found not guilty. It's interesting that Cassandra's father believes he is innocent. After conducting his own investigation, attending all of the hearings and visiting Argentina several times to learn more about the case, he came to the conclusion that Vera was not guilty of the crime. As a result, he apologized to Vera while he was incarcerated and launched a social media campaign to secure his release. Bouvier worries that while an innocent person is still incarcerated, the case review process is taking an unreasonably long time. On November 25, 2013, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, a monument honoring Cassandra and Horia, was formally unveiled in Salta. In response to Jean-Michel Bouvier's request to take on this piece, Salta-born sculptor Alfredo Garzon, who lived in Paris, created a face with an agonized expression, eyes, and an outstretched hand. Alfredo was able to capture the anguish, terror, and suffering that the girls endured in a very potent image. The bodies of the victims were discovered in the San Lorenzo ravine, where the sculpture is situated. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, then 7 years old, would give up on life at this very moment. 5 hours later, the world would hear the most tragic story on the internet, that of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, after an emergency 999 call was placed. He was discovered in a state that could not be explained by a fall, even though he had fallen and struck his head. He was remembered for his superpower, his smile. If one could ask for one last thing, despite having numerous guardian angels around him, Arthur was imprisoned by pure evil during COVID-19 and spent every day of his life in hell. Soon, the Midlands, England Police Department would find horrifying hidden footage and videos that they would prefer not to view. June 17, 2020 was the date of the call. The voice on the line was panicked. 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes had fallen down the stairs. When paramedics arrived, he was having trouble breathing. Arthur's life slipped away in spite of all the attempts to save him. Before the doctors noticed something that would haunt them for years, it appeared to be a tragic accident. Horrible injuries were found, which contradicted the caller's account. Arthur's severe brain injuries had caused his death. According to the doctors, the damage was comparable to an automobile accident. Even the on-scene paramedics observed numerous bruises on his body, in addition to severe head trauma. Amidst the frantic words and background noise of the 999 call, the truth was concealed in plain sight. Everyone would be shocked to learn the true story of Arthur's tragic demise when the recording was played again, this time with more discerning ears and a greater sense of suspicion. Something much darker now echoed what had once seemed like desperation. Emma Tustin, 32, the stepmother and caregiver of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, was the female voice on the call. Emma was the only person who saw Arthur's final moments because his father, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, was not there when the alleged accident happened. She was also the one who explained how Arthur got hurt and escorted him to the hospital. However, there was a problem with the doctors. They called the police because of their suspicions, and detectives soon began requesting Emma's first formal statement. The thinking step was the punishment area that Arthur's stepmother Emma and father Thomas had created for him. He could stand there and think about what he had done. Because of his actions, Arthur often found himself there, Emma said. However, Arthur was particularly impolite and violent on the night of June 17, 2020, the day he passed away. Emma started crying as she described the mischievous child who had mistreated her. She asserted, like many other stepmothers, that her love was not returned. However, the narrative did not match Emma's story, which remained mostly unchanged from the details in the 999 call. Although more research was necessary, the results would reveal a disturbing truth that would haunt the investigators for the rest of their careers. By 1 a.m., Arthur was placed on life support. After determining that there was nothing more that could be done, life support was turned off the next day. A forensic analysis conducted as the investigation progressed showed that Arthur had more than 130 distinct wounds, from head to toe, in varying stages of recovery. Each and every part of his small body was injured and bruised. Long-term physical stress caused his thymus gland and one kidney to shrink significantly. However, a total detachment of the retina in his right eye and bleeding on the brain were the cause of death. The experts had no idea that this was only the beginning. He had extremely high sodium levels when he was first brought to the hospital. These levels did not change 7 hours later, suggesting that his body was unable to adequately absorb the excess salt he had consumed. According to estimates, Arthur would have needed to eat 6 tablespoons of salt in a single day, or more likely, be poisoned with high amounts of salt over a number of days to reach such sodium levels. Torture was evident from the autopsy report and the injuries sustained. However, that wasn't even the reason this case was the most well-known in Middleton. It was the horrifying findings that had not yet been made during the inquiry that had the public's attention like a wildfire. Authorities were tracking down the sadistic monster who had committed the unthinkable after discovering the unspeakable horror inflicted upon the defenseless child. Behind the story of the tearful Emma and the restless Thomas, there was little question that something was amiss. Across the nation, rumors were circulating, but it quickly became clear that these were more than just conjectures. Discovering the atrocities that had taken place behind the scenes was the difficult part. A search warrant for Emma's 2-bedroom home, where she lived with her boyfriend Thomas Hughes and their children from prior marriages, was swiftly obtained by the Middleton police. Apart from a CCTV camera placed in the living room, nothing seemed especially noteworthy at first glance. Investigators were informed by Emma and Thomas that it was done to keep an eye on Arthur and make sure he didn't hurt himself. The investigators were unaware that the recordings held terrible secrets they would have preferred to ignore when they took them for additional analysis. Heartbreaking details of little Arthur's last hours were captured on CCTV, including scenes that would have horrified anyone who saw them. This unsettling video was captured just a few hours prior to Arthur's purported mishap. Arthur pleaded with Blake to come and save his life. Who were these individuals that Arthur was depending on in the final stages of his life? Blake was Thomas Hughes's brother and Arthur's uncle. When Arthur called for his family outside of Emma and Thomas, he was seen to be weak, frail, and hardly standing. Detectives contacted Arthur's grandparents and Uncle Blake during the hours that these recordings were being examined. In addition to being open, the family had a lot to share. The date of Arthur's birth was January 4, 2014. He was among the happiest kids you could ever meet just a year ago. He was a huge supporter of Birmingham City Football Club and loved superheroes. Those who knew him said he was intelligent and vivacious, but as the grandparents dug deeper, it became evident that Arthur was a contented but unlucky child. Thomas and Olivia Labinjo-Hughes, who met while engaging in drug activities, are his parents. Olivia entered a new toxic relationship with Arthur after the parents divorced, but Arthur stayed with her. She had taken an alcohol awareness course and met a man named Gary Cunningham. Gary and Olivia both used violence against one another. In February 2019, this toxic relationship tragically came to a head when Olivia killed Gary by stabbing him 12 times while intoxicated. The fact that young Arthur saw the murder was the most startling aspect of this incident. Olivia received an 11-year sentence in 2020, Little Arthur moved in with his father, Thomas, and grandparents, while the mother was serving her sentence. His grandparents and his uncle Blake were the main sources of the love he had experienced. For Arthur, this was the safest period of his life. The trail of misfortune started with a simple date, but the wave of good times would soon subside. Thomas, his father, went on a date with Emma Tustin, a woman he had met online. Detectives discovered that Emma had a history of unpredictable and attention-seeking behavior as the investigation progressed. When her boyfriend threatened to break up with her in 2013, she leaped from the top of a multi-story parking structure. She once threw herself out of a bedroom window to stop her partner and his best friend from going to the pub. In an interview with the Daily Mail, one of her ex-boyfriends stated, "She's a black widow. Every man she hangs out with is sucked dry by her. She has absolutely no maternal instinct. She wanted children because of the attention they gave her as a newborn and the benefits they provided. But she didn't want to know once the attention stopped and she was left alone with a baby." She was also accused of being a careless mother, and social services frequently visited her home. The ultimate application of this woman's evil would be when she entered Thomas's, and eventually Arthur's, life. Thomas wasn't a perfect father, but he wasn't a total nightmare either. But as he and Emma became closer, that would soon change, and Arthur would lose his father in a way he never could have predicted. Arthur went on a number of excursions with his father and Emma, but each time he came back, the grandparents noticed that he was becoming less and less eager to accompany them. He couldn't quite understand the unnerving tension that was replacing the warmth of family. His grandparents claimed that they became aware that something was amiss in their own house. Every time Emma came to visit, Arthur would try to hide because he was afraid of her. She was disliked by Thomas's brother and parents as well, who perceived dishonesty and disdain in her. They were unable to foresee the scope of what was happening, though. When Arthur's grandmother tried to buy him a Subway sandwich during one of Emma's visits, Emma yelled at her to stop feeding him, saying it was a needless luxury. This brief interaction acted as a warning, demonstrating Emma's ease and eagerness to make choices regarding Arthur's life. She wasn't alone, though. Thomas was also acting differently. He had started to become easily agitated. Blake saw the young boy staring blankly at the wall when Thomas, for a child, it was an unusual sight. Blake tried to give him a snack to lift his spirits, but Thomas stepped in and said Arthur was being punished and shouldn't be fed. As the pandemic spread, this was only the start of a nightmare that would only get worse. A total lockdown was proclaimed by the Prime Minister. Arthur had the danger in his own house while others hunkered down to protect themselves. Separated from his cherished grandparents, he was raised by his father, Thomas, and Emma, and saw them infrequently. Things were gradually coming together for Arthur's decline. Arthur's grandmother saw a blue bruise on his shoulder during one lockdown. She took prompt action and lodged a complaint with social services, even though she was Thomas's mother. When Arthur got back to Emma and Thomas's house the next day, a social services agent called Emma and paid her a visit. But nothing was done about it. They insisted that Arthur and Emma's other two children looked content and healthy, and they denied that there was any bruise. But the call prior to the visit was sufficient justification for Emma to be on guard and take the required precautions to hide it, according to the grandmother. Blake tried to get in touch with the Middleton police, but sadly the officers never got through to Arthur because they believed social services was handling the case. The family made repeated attempts to enlist assistance for Arthur, but there would be no outcome. Arthur was suffering terribly, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Meanwhile, Arthur's death was being investigated more thoroughly. Though they were unsure of what might have caused Arthur's death, Arthur's grandparents and family blamed Emma and Thomas. The couple was the subject of a more thorough investigation, and the most repulsive information began to come to light. After seizing their phones, investigators started going through the data. They found shocking information in the audio recordings and text messages between Emma and Thomas. The weight of what had been concealed behind closed doors became painfully evident with every new line that appeared on the screen. Emma and Thomas's messages exposed the depth of their perverse collaboration, and they were complicit in this nightmare. The messages described Arthur's living conditions, which included physical abuse, loneliness, and hunger. Emma vented her frustrations and documented her increasing cruelty towards the boy in the majority of these texts. She punished Arthur by depriving him of food and liquids and making him stand in the hallway for hours on end. The young boy's pleas for sustenance and solace were ridiculed. He referred to his desperation as misbehavior. For Emma and Thomas, the conversations were a perverse kind of reinforcement in these messages. When Thomas wasn't home, she would frequently record Arthur's anguished cries and send Thomas audio snippets, seemingly to get his approval for her severe treatment. Thomas would reply by expressing his own annoyance with Arthur and urging her to be even harsher, telling her to just end him or recommending violent means to stop his screams. The boy was left to suffer alone in his room or cry himself hoarse in the hallway while the couple, at times, were only a few feet away from Arthur and texted, their phones buzzing with nasty conversations. Emma complained that Arthur was acting out or spoiling him because of his need for affection. Emma and Thomas talked about how Arthur should be disciplined for small transgressions or denied certain foods. Neglect was not the only form of abuse. There were numerous instances of name-calling and verbal abuse in these messages. Both sides' hatred was clearly visible in these messages. The messages made it abundantly evident that there was physical torture and intimidation in the home. Arthur had been attacked several times. According to one of the messages, Emma and Thomas had a falling out, and Emma said she could accept Thomas but not Arthur. In a stern reply, Thomas insisted that she would have to take Arthur and him together or not at all. Since Emma's rejection of Arthur only made Thomas more irate, this exchange exposed the problematic dynamics of their relationship. This tension suggested that Thomas's rage could quickly grow and result in more abuse of Arthur. One thing was certain, despite the numerous questions, Arthur was leading a miserable life and frequently going without food. For the investigators, one CCTV clip that had previously seemed unimportant took on new significance. On one of the hottest days of the year, the video showed Thomas and Emma lounging and eating ice cream. Arthur, meanwhile, was made to stand on the stairs, hot and hungry, without water, and in a bulky onesie that made him feel even more uncomfortable. Emma stooped to eat McDonald's in front of a starving Arthur, who was left defenseless in the hallway, while Thomas sat cross-legged. The question came up. Did Emma's children all experience the same level of suffering? The investigators learned from Arthur's grandparents that Emma's children were frequently abandoned and left hungry for extended periods of time, while Emma remained in her room. But Arthur's ordeal was particularly horrifying. Emma's children didn't seem to experience the same degree of abuse as Arthur in any of the video. Subsequently, Emma's kids would inform investigators that if they attempted to assist Arthur, they would also be punished. As another heartbreaking clip awaited their review, the unsettling details of this case seemed to go on forever. Arthur was seen standing and shuffle-footing in these clips. It appeared innocuous at first, until they discovered he had been upright for as long as 14 hours. Police clamped down on Thomas and Emma as the horrific details surfaced, interrogating them about Arthur and the devastating information in the recordings. The details of Thomas and Emma's accident story started to shift piece by piece, but Thomas would be the first to reveal the truth, which was even more terrifying than they already knew. Thomas admitted to them that his punishment of Arthur might have been excessive. He explained to the investigators that Emma and the family suffered as a result of Arthur's behavioral problems. Thomas was going to disclose that he had studied torture techniques used during interrogation, techniques that caused the most pain without leaving scars or bruises, even though it was difficult to comprehend what offense a 6-year-old could have committed to warrant such a punishment. What actually took place on June 17, 2020 then? But did Arthur's body simply give up after all this suffering? No. The case's reality was straightforward and cruel. In fact, the reality was even more horrible. Arthur was left behind as usual, weak and starved, while Thomas had gone to the grocery store with Emma's kids. Emma texted Thomas that Arthur was causing trouble and instructed her to discipline him, even though Arthur couldn't have done anything that she couldn't manage on her own. In a matter of hours, Emma made the decision to act independently and guided Arthur to his demise. Emma repeatedly slammed Arthur's head against the wall, knocking him out by the time Thomas got back. After several unsuccessful attempts to get Arthur to get up, Emma called 999 and told them that Arthur had beaten himself before falling. Thomas blatantly admitted to the investigators that he was to blame and that Emma ought to be released. He explained to them that Arthur died because he was unable to control him and was subsequently carried away. Emma wasn't at fault. From Middleton to Parliament, the unsettling case rocked the nation. The authorities eventually realized that Emma and Thomas had lied after Arthur died, and the injuries were obviously not self-inflicted. Both were taken into custody and accused of killing Arthur. At Emma's trial on December 3, 2021, the judge gave the following account of the deadly assault. You, Tustin, committed the last act of killing. You gave him a shake that caused his head to flex and become hyperextended on his neck while repeatedly striking it against the wall or the floor. Your degree of violence caused his body to be subjected to forces comparable to those involved in a high-speed traffic accident. Emma was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years in prison because of the severe and devastation of her injuries. Thomas Hughes, who did not witness the deadly assault, was convicted of manslaughter and given a 21-year prison term. It was announced in December 2020 that their sentences would be examined to determine whether they were excessively light, potentially resulting in longer terms for both. Only the two youngest of Emma's 4 children from prior relationships were still living with her when she first met Thomas. Emma had already been reported to social services multiple times by that point because of worries about the welfare of her children. But she had mastered the art of controlling these circumstances. She would use emotional strategies, crying and playing the victim whenever social services came to visit. The authorities would always depart without doing anything more. Although social services had always been mentioned in the story, their non-participation was an unexpected plot twist. How come Arthur's ongoing suffering went unnoticed despite social services getting involved in this case so early? How did social services contribute to Arthur's demise in your opinion? What, in your opinion, ought to have been done to save young Arthur from his cruel destiny? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.